Chapter 32.
Never attempt to win by force what can be won by deception.
Niccolo Machiavelli. Frey, it is good to see you. At some point you should come over for some more of the mead. I found a new supplier. My voice was light and friendly, and I saw all of them blink and try to reorient. What had they expected? Me to come over swinging a sword? Yes. You are looking much better than the last time I visited. I take it the birth went well. She managed after a stutter or two. Her hand didn't stray far from her sword, and I didn't blame her at all. It definitely qualified as a once-in-a-lifetime event, and one I have zero desire to repeat, I said with a smile. Salastra, I see you are looking horsey. I had no idea what else to say that wouldn't be a lie. A snicker came from the horse.
You are finally becoming a herald. It took you long enough. I had feared it would never happen.
I still believe that you shouldn't need one, but you won't see that there are better ways to handle things. Since no one will give me any other options, I'll do it. I pivoted to nod to the huge creature next to me. And the other lord? The Chitarian had at least 12 legs, maybe more depending on if smaller ones were hidden by being tucked up under her. Frey cleared her throat.
This is Sistark. I'm surprised you did not back away screaming from her. Most find her discomforting.
I shot Frey a look. I try very hard to not be a bigot. I turned a bit to face Sistark. I am honored to meet you. One of my friends has a focus that is Chitarian, Ericina. She is delightful. The Chitarian flushed to a bright pink, almost neon.
Ericina. Friend. Smart. Good hunter. Fast weaver.
So is her mage. He helped me defeat a Leviathan. All three of the Order Lords stared at me.
Leviathan?
Frey asked slowly. Well, that is my name for it. Carolean said they don't really have names. Huge, like more than 60 feet huge, with 4 eyes and a mouth full of teeth. I shuddered at the memory of that thing.
You killed one?
Frey asked, just staring at me. Me? Yes. Well, no, not by myself. I had 2 other Merlins and an archmage with me, plus Carolean. He saved the day more than we realized. But yeah, it was definitely dead. That much I was sure of.
I must admit, I am impressed. They are not easily killed,
Salastra said, her crystal bell tone softer than normal. No shit, that thing almost took out our boat, I said.
Wait, you were on the water and you killed it?
Frey burst in, her voice hitting a sharp note. Well, yeah, we were out fishing. I looked at them. Don't tell me none of you have ever killed one.
I am unaware of anyone that has succeeded in doing that. You are either braver than I thought, or an idiot.
Frey was still looking at me with a weird look.
Neither. She simply responded to the situation. The fish she caught was delicious, though,
Tersane said, sliding into the conversation.
The retelling of that battle would make for an excellent epic poem.
The 3 Order Lords nodded to Tersane as she joined the conversation. Hey, Tersane. So, do you have any idea where to find the information Birdbrain is talking about? I'm not even sure what the undoing was or why he seems to be blaming me. And I'd like to remind you, this is the Herald of Magic asking for help to solve a problem that affects all of us. I so didn't have time to deal with the trading of favors or anything else of that nature.
I not know. Our lives not long. Undoing ancient story,
Sistark said, waving 2 front mandibles. Frey frowned for a minute, her eyes locked on me.
It doesn't mean much to me. I mean, I know what the undoing was, but the Valkyrie were never locked out the way others were. For a while, the worship gave us access to our lands. It has only been in the last 200 years or so that the calls to Earth have lessened." She must have seen the confusion on my face and flickered her wings. "Faith and the cry of a battle can open a portal for our realm, specifically. But if you don't believe, it doesn't open. Like I said, those have been fainter, and we have few other reasons to go to Earth."
"Do you really collect souls?"
Shay asked. I glanced at him, and he seemed completely captivated by the conversation. Frey laughed. "Do you still think that we take heroes to Valhalla?"
"It is what the myths say,"
he countered. "No, we grab men worthy of living a bit longer, and take those who would otherwise die without our interference. And contrary to Brix's insinuations, we do not kill male children. They are placed in homes on Earth where most men eventually go back to." She shrugged. "It works." The lure to ask more questions was there, but that wasn't my purpose today. I needed information more than I needed legends. "So what was the undoing?" Tursane replied, her snakes coiled up tight. "It was when magic and Earth were separated, but I don't know what caused it or when. I know the heralds before that, so there are rough Earth timelines, but for many it was unnoticed, and those that cared have long since died. We are not immortal, and even for us, 3,000 or more years is a very long time." "So why is he harping on it? I've never heard anyone wishing for the good old days while I've been here. Is it a thing?" Tursane and Salastra stared at each other for a minute, then back at me. "Actually, no," Tursane said. "I don't believe I've ever heard much bemoaning about that." "Some of the older ones talked about the gifts their ancestors used to receive," Salastra said. "Like there would be offerings of honey and mead for help with one thing or another. The ability to get things that your people made was higher, but for actually missing it, not that I have heard of." All of them sounded unsure of anything. I scrubbed my hands across my face. "Fine, I'll go talk to Bob, but this is a serious request. Order if you want an order from the Herald. I need some information if you want me to do this. Otherwise, the cost is going to be greater than I think anyone wants to pay. I killed one Leviathan, but too many more of them would devastate our oceans. If creatures keep slipping out into populated areas, there will be repercussions. I get that this seems a someday thing. It isn't. It is a now thing that could become a never if we aren't careful." I started to turn away, seeing the shuddered expression on Sidlali and considering expression on Shay. They needed information badly, but it would have to wait until we weren't here. I paused, giving them one last hard look. "Oh, one last thing to consider. If I die, you lose the primary chance you have of stopping Earth from retaliating. You might want to think about that." I didn't glance back as I headed over to Chaos.
"Cori, are you sure you know what you are doing?"
Shay asked in a low whisper. "I keep telling you everyone here has better hearing than you do. Whispering is a wasted effort. And nope. But I do know if they don't help, we are all in a world of hurt. I promise I'll explain as soon as we are done here." Bob was the last being I wanted to deal with, but he was the major one left, and while Esmere could ask, I suspected I had the ability to force answers. I reached the ring where the Chaos Lords lounged, and I walked right in. Esmere flipped her tail at me, but didn't say anything. "Esmere, Bob, I don't believe I've met your third lord." I focused on the Naga, who watched me like I was a mongoose getting ready to pounce. The imagery amused me, as it was a bit more accurate than she might think.
"Cori, this is Sharissa of the Venom Nagas. Sharissa, Cori Munroe, Herald."
Esmere's voice was dry enough to make me want my tumbler, but instead I gave the Naga a nod. She was taller than me on her tail, but not as tall as Tursane. They both had the lower bodies of snakes, but while Tursane had scales, the Naga had banded leather-like skin instead. She was a medium brown color, about what a blonde roast with a splash of espresso in it would look like. Her hair was lustrous black and fell to her shoulder blades. The eyes that stared at me were light green, with obsidian pupils slit vertically. She was pretty, but there was something about her eyes and the structure of her face that made her look more reptilian than Tursane did.
I have seen you. You think you are more important than us because you are the heralds,
she said. Her voice had a soft level of sibilance to it, making the difference between her and Tursane more apparent. No, you all say I'm the herald. I just quit arguing. And if you're going to treat me like I'm the herald and demand impossible things from me, screw it. I'll go with it. But don't lay this on me. I raised my hand as I talked, having zero care if I offended or not.
You don't want the power, the honor of the rule?
Her eyes were locked on me, questioning. Honor? Power? I'm sorry, are there benefits someone didn't bother to share with me? So far I've gotten shit dumped on me, told it was my problem, and then everyone bails. If there is some benefit to this other than bragging rights, which I don't need, please tell me. I didn't give an inch. Her mouth opened, then closed, and dark brows drew down heavily over her eyes, but she didn't say anything else. So, girls and blobs, does anyone have any information or know where I can find it? At this point, do you know someone that was alive and witnessed the undoing? I gazed at each of them in turn, arms across my chest and gaze direct. Esmere flicked her tail at me. Cath only lived a few hundred years. I don't even know of any whose great-grandparents were around at that time. We don't write books. We tell all our stories orally, and the only story of the undoing Caroline should know.
I do? What is that?
Caroline asked, though a quick glance showed him still curled up in the bed, peacefully with Kessis. It would be fish now gone, Esmere said, her voice calm.
Oh, yes, that one. I can tell that one, but I do not think there will be much information.
Okay, later, at home. Just from the name and all the Cath's fascination with fish, I had a strong suspicion of what the tale would contain, but I'd listen anyhow. I took a deep breath and faced the blob of chaos. Bob, do you know anything about the undoing? Or someone that is old enough to remember being there? The blob of black tarriness had shifted somehow, facing me. I braced myself.
You were a child unfilled. You are weak. You strong enough to make him tell.
Where Salastra was crystal when she spoke to me, Esmere the rumble of a purr, Bob was a mace made of needle-sharp points that slammed into my head. I heard Shay and Sitlali groan behind me. A trickle of blood tickled as it slipped down to my lip. Maybe, maybe not. It would be easier to let it be known that chaos is in favor of the Rips and doesn't care if other realms are destroyed. Then the other lords can deal with you. I lifted my hand and wiped the blood off with my thumb, not bothering to look at my hand.
Smart, but no. I'm old, but memory of before not real, not detailed. Now it happened, not remember why, whose, or what's.
The attack felt less brutal this time, but I still felt blood ooze from both nostrils now. Very well. If you know or remember something, tell me, please. I can't do anything if I don't know what to do. The blob bobbled, then slumped down, leaving a tarry stain on the cobblestones. Well done, Cori. I glanced at Esmere. Maybe. They don't discount me now, but I still don't have anything to go on. She hissed a bit.
I know. We will keep looking. Go, take medicine for your head. The others are hurting.
I turned at that to see a pale Shay with blood running from his nose and ears, while Citlali had one eye red with burst vessels and blood oozed from where she had clenched her hands so hard the nails cut into the skin. Come on, my fellow lords. You look like you could use a drink and some painkillers. I headed to Caerleon, who had stood stretching.
Morten,
muttered Shay, as he and Citlali turned to follow me. Chapter 33. As more rips occur and the government is reaching out to the houses and colleges for assistance in closing them, the recall of Merlins is coming up again and again. Merlins are the most powerful of mages, and they are able to close rips like these with a smaller amount of offering as opposed to even an archmage, and those with familiars are even less. The rules to recall Merlins state that there must be a national disaster or emergency. If the president declares the rips either of those, then they will be open to being recalled to active duty. CNN Mage Focus. I left the furniture, curious as to if it would still be there next time, and stepped through the portal to home. I moaned with relief as we entered the house, and I stripped off my backpack and jacket. It had definitely been overkill, but made me feel better, and I was all for that. I glanced at the clock. 1 p.m. Time had gone faster than I thought. Lunch? I'm starving, and I'm grabbing ibuprofen. You want some?
Painkillers? So much yes. And yes, please, more fish.
Shay said eagerly. I glanced at Citlali, who had the best poker face I'd ever seen. I'm going to go wash up. If you two would like, there is a bathroom right around the corner. They both nodded, and I headed upstairs to wash my face. The 2 trails of blood had dried on my face, my hair was shorter, and the eyes that looked back at me seemed foreign and old. I stared at myself in the mirror, wondering who the mage was that looked back at me. It didn't matter. I grabbed a bottle of pills and headed back downstairs. I found both of them standing awkwardly in the kitchen. Take a seat at the bar. I set the bottle down, pulled out glasses, and filled them with water. We all reached for them and swallowed the pills and icy water. Citlali, hi, I'm Cori. I'm sorry your introduction was so, I fumbled for the right word. Adventure-filled, she said dryly. I grinned. That. I'm sure you both have questions, and Citlali, do you mind sharing why you were picked? And what was the dying thing Amadahi mentioned? That part worried and confused me. We know when our time is coming, especially a mage of her age. She wanted to prepare. I think she has a few weeks at most. Citlali said, her voice calm. Oh, is there something I can do? Guilt slammed into me with the force of a sledgehammer. Citlali smiled, a hint of joy in that. No, there is nothing to grieve about. She has lived a full, good life. She is ready to join our ancestors. It wasn't the words as much as how she said them that reassured me. Okay, so what do we need to know about you, and what do you need to know about us? She took another drink of water as I started pulling food out for all of us. Oh, and does Kessis like fish?
Kessis loves fish. Thank you very much.
A new voice said in my head. I twisted to see the fox sitting in the 4th bar seat, watching me with bright brownish-red eyes. So noted. Kessis, I'm Cori. It's nice to meet you. I caught the look of surprise on Citlali's face as I moved back to the fridge. She spoke to you. Her voice was flat. Yeah, most of them do, and I'm not sure why, I said with a shrug.
It is because you see beings, not creatures or animals. You accept all of us, and your mind welcomes our words. So many, even those that are mages with focuses cannot do that. It makes you comfortable to speak to.
Kessis said. Ah, okay. I wasn't sure what to do with that.
Is that why you speak to me? It always sounds slightly muffled and distorted.
Shay asked Caroline suddenly.
Yes,
Caroline said.
We have to push harder for you to hear. For my queen, we have to work to not include her in conversations, though you have been getting better.
Citlali sat there looking at me with a strange look on her face. I am beginning to understand why Amadahi called you Child of Coyote. You definitely leave chaos in your wake. I sighed as I threw swordfish in a pan for a quick sear after seasoning it. I'd prepare sashimi for the cats, and I set out a bottle of hot sauce for Caroline. You have no idea how often people tell me that. She just looked at me, then shook her head. You asked what you needed to know about me. Need is an unusual word, not want. You let me choose what I share with you, not demanding answers. Why? I shrugged. You have things that I don't need to know. You're obviously not a teenager, so I'm going to trust you have the ability to choose to tell me what I need for this situation. Later, if we become friends, you can share more as you feel like it or not. Right now, I'd just like to see if we can solve the problem that has been dumped in my lap. The aroma of cooking fish filled the air, and everyone glanced at the pan with hungry looks. Shay just laughed.
Cori has been a vehicle for chaos since I met her, and that was, 20 years ago? At that time, she was a barista at the only coffee shop in town. Back then, I was much more self-centered than I am now.
I cast him a disbelieving glance as I put some cheese and crackers out to nibble on. I handed a few pieces of cheese to Caroline and Kessis. Kessis ate it with apparent gusto.
I am, he protested. Sloane has a way of not letting you lie to yourself. It's annoying having a friend who's a psychologist. It was his secondary degree.
Shay reached for the crackers and cheese after that, stuffing his face. The meds were kicking in for all of us, as I could see the stress lines fading from faces. Amadahi and Nara came back and explained the situation to our council, saying they would look for a warrior who was the equivalent of your Merlins. I am one of the few. Most of our people are what you would call archmages. I am also one of the few that hunt in the realms.
Citlali and I are excellent hunters. We know the forest and the plains. The beasts we hunt always fall to our weapons.
Kessis had finished the cheese while we were talking. Caroline, where do you want to eat? He had made it clear long ago that eating on the floor was not acceptable. He wasn't a pet. He'd been sitting on the floor watching all of us, but hadn't jumped up into the empty stool between Citlali and Shay. I figured he'd tell me why later.
Set it on the counter. I'll graze. I'm not overly hungry at the moment.
I nodded and put a plate of sashimi on the end of the counter and a plate in front of Kessis. The fox didn't have hands the way Caroline did, but was a neat eater with her pointed nose and teeth. They do, but I was trained in the ways to use magic as a weapon. Most mages find that path too arduous, but Kessis and I enjoyed the challenges and opportunities to seek prey. Citlali had regained a calm expression, but her dark brown eyes watched and analyzed everything. What branch? I asked. I was everything. Shay was primarily chaos. Order, though we call it life. I shot her a look. So little was known about her land or society. She provided the information. Our branches in English would be called life, entropy, and essence. The actual words we use aren't so simple, but it is close enough. I longed to ask about what language or languages they used, but now wasn't the time. That makes sense. What do you want to know about me, or this whole mess? I plated the swordfish, grabbed leftover pasta salad from the fridge, and set it on the counter while providing some utensils. Eat up. Let me know if you need something else. I assumed there weren't any allergies to worry about. Mages rarely had food allergies, so if they had, I figured they would have spoken up. Everyone was silent as we ate a few bites, and I felt myself relax as the flavors hit my tongue, then my stomach. It was like my body quit tensing for a blow, the food retelling my hind brain I was safe. Can you give me an overview about the magic that is being fed in the rips and where you got the information about Earth launching weapons into the rips? Citlali asked after a few minutes of eating. Sure. I filled them in with everything I knew, as well as the fact that I had strong access to all classes. I thought Shay might choke when I said that. Just keep that one a secret. I really don't want the Omo to know, and there is that blasted clause about recall for Merlins. The last thing I need is the government coming up with a reason to reactivate me because I'm uber powerful. Besides, even with that, closing these rips is expensive. I pointed to my hair that was just past my shoulder blades. I've used up about 6 inches in the last few months between the Leviathan and the rips, and that is with a familiar. They both sat there not talking while we ate. I didn't rush anyone. It was a lot to take in, and if time allowed us to come up with answers, we could sit there all day. I don't know what to say. Can you clarify what was going on with the council meeting today? I felt like I'd walked into a battle of cliques.
Me too,
Shay said, his head jerking up.
I knew you were going to push things, but that was a bit extreme.
Remember what I said about us being too polite? Well, when I found out about the weapons and rips on Earth, I realized it wasn't that I needed to be less polite. I needed to be in their faces and force them to deal with me.
And if they killed you? Citlali asked slowly. They are powerful beings.
And my queen is more powerful,
Caroline said, a note of warning in his voice.
They will not think of her as lesser.
I reached over to scratch his head. He'd been standing on his hind legs, picking up the hot sauce and covering pieces of fish with it. He'd passed one over to Kessis per a private request, I assumed. The fox had not liked it, taking one lick and pushing it back to him. Caroline ate it gladly. Kath had no fear of cooties at all. That was a possibility, but I judged it a low one. They're all about posturing and social standing. They dismiss humans because we have no natural weapons and we are taught to be polite. There's a huge swath of people in our society that can sense lies, so we rarely lie, and we expect others to act the same. The denizens don't. They work on power and strength, and if you can't prove you are strong enough to be taken seriously, they won't. I shrugged. The draft and everything else pounds it into mages to be polite. Don't use your powers for offense. Make sure you don't break the law. It is a hard mindset to break, and it is exactly the wrong mindset to use with them. They both looked at me, a dawning look of understanding on Shay's face, and calculated thought on Citlali's.
I begin to see the issue. What about this information you need to stop the rips?
Citlali had finished her food and was just moving the bones around on the plate. I wish I knew. Most of them don't write, and if the undoing was 3,000 years ago, that is a long time. We don't have anything talking about it that I know of. Though I need to put up a request on the House of Emrys board. Maybe see if anyone has seen some really old texts that mention it. Shay sighed.
By the time this is done, I'm going to need a case of tequila. Too bad they don't have a library where all this information is stored.
It felt like someone had slapped me in the face. Of course! How the fuck did I forget? I wanted to scream at my own stupidity. Hamadia, are you there?
Of course, Cori,
she said as she stepped out of the wall into the kitchen. Shay squeaked, but the look of shock on Citlali's face would have caused me to ask questions. But right now, I had something much more important to ask. Hamadia, the trials you put me through to be a herald, do you remember those? I asked, my voice almost desperate.
I did not really put you through them. That was Magic and the Lords. I believe Tersane, Salastra, and Bob were directly behind them. But yes.
She was almost all green today, and the flowers tracing her arms and collarbones were pale yellow and pink. Motherhood was making her all but glow with happiness. Okay, the challenge I did for order. The library, I said, my heart lodged in my throat. Was the library real? Everything hung on that question. Chapter 34. The Library of Alexandria has always been the lost treasure for those who seek knowledge, but there is so much history in our songs, our poems, those stories that travel down via families. Join the Memory Project and submit your stories and memories before they are lost, just like the library was. Memory Project.
Library?
Hemadia frowned at me, then she grinned.
Oh, yes, the library. You had to get a stone or something. I assume it was real. Why?
There were so many books there, including, I think, ones written a long time ago. I avoided the memory of the Book of Death. If I had seen that then, there would have been my name written on it. The thought saddened me, but it was over and done. All I could do was move forward. Those books might have the answers I'm looking for. Hemadia wiggled her shoulders.
I really don't know what was magic generated, what was realms, and what was real. Obviously, you went to Salastra's realm as part of your challenge, and the villages were mostly magical constructs, basically like your moving pictures. They were there to make you think and react that way based on your past. But the library?
That was spirit, right?
Yes. Tersane helped to create that.
Hemadia said with a nod. Thank you so much. Maybe we have an answer after all. Hemadia waved at Shay and Sitlali and stepped back into the walls, and probably headed to one of the houses.
Cori, what are you talking about?
Shay asked. I quickly explained about the trials, the places I had to go. There are 2 statues upstairs of mages that didn't pass the tests. There used to be 3, but I traded one of them to Tersane to get some information. Speaking of which, I closed my eyes and focused on Tersane. Tersane, do you have a minute? There was a slight delay, then her voice.
I am still at the council, so anything would be a nice distraction.
Shay and Sitlali were looking at me, and I knew they couldn't hear this. I'm talking to Tersane. Give me a minute. I switched to mind speak. Tersane, when I did the challenges or trials for magic, there was a library in the spirit trial. Was it real? There was a long period of silence.
Library. I had forgotten about that.
She trailed off.
I don't understand. I should have remembered about the library. And even now I forget about it. It is real, but we don't use or think of it often. I believe there are only 5 races that can easily write, and only 7 or 8 that have ever bothered encouraging reading as a species.
She still sounded odd, as if I'd shaken her worldview. So, we can go to the library? I couldn't keep the eagerness out of my voice. I enjoyed libraries in the first place, but being able to actually look at those books made my desire to know all but scream in joy.
Maybe. I mean, it is the library, but I'm not positive how to get there. Where did you need to go?
Her voice sounded confused again. My joy drained out of me like I'd been filled full of sadness holes. The library, it is in your realm.
Oh, yes, it is. And
if I didn't know better, I'd have said she wasn't paying me any attention, but I knew she was. But magic was wrapped around this. Tersane, may I have open permission as the Herald to Magic to go through your realm to look for the library?
The library. Of course. That might hold the answers you need. Feel free, but I don't know where it is.
That is okay. Thank you, Torsane. I ended the conversation and sagged back against the counter. I swear, I find out one thing and then another obstacle jumps in my way. I peered at the two of them. Do you remember me asking Hamadia about a library? Shay gave me a funny look. Are you feeling okay, Cori? I don't know. Do you remember? I held onto the counter, completely unsure as to which answer I wanted or which I'd get. Yeah? You just asked the Dryad not 3 minutes ago. He stared at me. Do you need some coffee or a nap? I sagged in relief and glanced at the two familiars who had just as funny of a look on their faces. You two remember as well?
Yes, I take it Torsane had issues,
Kirlian said with a whisker twitch. Yes, I muttered. I started putting the dishes away with a bit more force than was strictly healthy for their integrity. I don't understand, Citlali said. The Spirit Lord didn't remember a library that you visited a decade ago? No, not at all, which means maybe it isn't real. Maybe it is, and magic doesn't want it found. Or maybe something else. I stood in the kitchen, not knowing where to go or what to do next. A splash of pain pulled my attention to the back of the house. Esmere walked in, her emerald green fur shining. Kirlian said you thought magic was interfering? Citlali took in a sharp breath while Kessis dropped off the stool and hid under the table. Shay just paled and darted his eyes around. I sighed. I don't know if it is a good thing or a bad thing that I consistently forget you're a huge apex predator, and when you lay down in council chambers, you appear much smaller. Shay, I know you've met Esmere. Citlali, this is Esmere, Chaos Lord, as I'm sure you figured out, and Kirlian's mother, and my friend. I scratched her forehead for a moment. I have some sashimi left. Would you like it? She rumbled the purr in an answer. That would be wonderful. It is good to meet you, Citlali. So, what is the question? Citlali blinked, and her gaze went from Esmere's large pony size to Kirlian's large St. Bernard size. Will you get that big?
Possibly, but that is years away. My Malkin is almost 200. We get larger with age and good food.
Kirlian sounded unconcerned. I winced, thinking if he got that big, I'd need a larger bed. I set out some of the sashimi, pulling it from the stasis realm Hamadia had created. With a few quick moves, I had it plated for her. She just sat next to the counter like Kirlian had done, but she didn't need to rise up on her hind legs. She just reached out and picked up the pieces, tossing them into her mouth. What is the issue? Esmere, do you know of a library in the realms? I asked, keeping my voice calm. Of course. It is the Library of Magic. She broke off and froze mid-reach. Void shards! She hissed. Why did I not remember about the library? I have always known of that. Yet when you were pregnant and we were searching for answers, none of us thought of it. When you asked about this not an hour ago, it never occurred to me. With all our fretting, it never popped up as this might be something that could be of use. What is going on? There was a level of anger in her voice that would have had me stepping back if I wasn't already pressed against a counter. So, you know of it? I asked, this time cautious. Yes, we all do, but... She trailed off, setting a piece of sashimi back down on the plate. Yet at no time have I thought of it. She whacked Kirlian on the head. Do you remember the library? He laid his ears back and hissed a bit at her, but still responded.
No. Should I? I remember her mentioning it when she entered, but I had never been there before. I did not go with her. I stayed to watch my queens. At that time, Hamadia was not to be trusted, but she has become a friend over the years.
Esmere's tail twitched as if it wanted to lash at something.
I suppose not.
She stared at the floor for a long time. I glanced over at the others to see pale faces, and I almost felt sorry for them. My normal life made everyone else's crazy lives seem boring by comparison.
This could be me speaking out of turn, but it is possible you only remember when in the presence of the Herald?
Citlali asked slowly.
Which is why Caroline would never forget, because he is always around her.
Esmere lifted her head to stare at Citlali, who met her gaze for gaze, much to my amusement.
That is an excellent question. Let us test it. I shall go to my planes.
She turned and padded out of the room, and a splash of pain later, I no longer sensed her in the house. You want anything else? I asked the other two as I turned to put dishes away. I'd gotten better at cooking, but still I preferred quick, easy-to-grill options to anything else. It meant I couldn't leave it, which was when disasters always happened.
Whiskey and more comfortable chairs?
Shay asked. I peered at the circles under his eyes and nodded. In the sunroom. He nodded and rose, then made his way there. Citlali?
Tea is preferable.
I grabbed a kettle, filled it with water, used a trace of magic to set it boiling, then pulled a mug from the cupboard and a tea selection. Help yourself. My own desires led to Mexican coffee. I needed the sugar and the caffeine. Minutes later, all of us were in the sunroom, the fireplace going, and Caroline and Kessa sprawled out in front, enjoying the heat. Esmere? I pinged.
Yes, Cori?
Her voice a distracted purr. Just the way she asked that told me she'd forgotten, but I pushed ahead anyhow. Do you know anything about the Library of Magic?
Of course. That is where you should go. Why haven't you gone already? Didn't you go once?
She trailed off, as if distracted by something.
Cori, why do I have a craving for your sashimi to the point I can taste it in my mouth?
Her voice was confused and a bit twitchy. It's okay. I'll send Caroline over to you with some later. Thank you.
Very well. I do love your fish, though.
She ended the conversation, and I looked at the others and shook my head. She didn't even remember being here a short while ago.
I do not like that anything, even magic, is messing with memories.
Caroline didn't move from the fireplace, but his ears were back and his tail twitched a bit harder than normal.
Agreed. But where does that leave us? Is it the Herald or humans? Will we forget? Will you? What are the options?
Shay asked as he stared morosely into his half-full whiskey glass. I suppose anyone with a strong and psychic could do that. You can pull on memories. There's no reason why you couldn't destroy them. I just never tried. I wrapped my hands around my mug, heating it back up as I thought. Let's plan for the worst case. I groaned as I said that, and double-checked that none of us had Murphy's cloak up.
And that will be?
Citlali asked, her own mug steaming in her hands. I rose and grabbed a notebook from the pile of things we kept in here for the kids. It had scribbles all over it, but there was a crayon and a blank sheet. It would work. It would be me writing out that I needed to visit the Library of Magic located in Spirit, and it means that I need to go sooner rather than later. I wrote carefully as I spoke, recording every bit of information as neatly as I could. Crayons were not the neatest of writing instruments. Citlali nodded.
Just you, or should all of us go?
I don't know. And I didn't. Last time, it was a test. But this time, it is like something is specifically hiding that library from us. And I don't think Brix is that powerful. And I'm really scared the moment we leave each other's company, we will all forget. I let a bitter laugh slip out. And even worse, I don't know if it will have the answers I need. Shay shrugged.
I guess there isn't a reason we can't go now.
My phone rang, and I recognized the ringtone. You have got to be kidding me. I sighed and picked it up. Hello?
Cori!
Stephen sounded frantic.
I need your help.
Chapter 35. Are the rips the precursor to the end of our way of life? Global warming has been the hot topic for the last 2 decades. But now, the tears between this reality and others are proving a much greater threat. Can humanity survive this, or is this what killed civilizations before us? Magical Daily News. Rip? I asked, suddenly exhausted.
Yes, they have 2, but the one we have to stop now, actually an hour ago, is the one at Niagara Falls. The ecological impact is going to kill the Northeast if we don't.
I could hear sirens and wind blowing. What do you mean? What is coming out? I had risen, standing to look outside at the snowy ground.
Nothing is coming out. That is the problem. A rip opened before the falls, prior to the hydroelectric dams. The majority of the water is going into it. We're lucky that it is a small rip, so the water is pooling and some is getting past it. But if we keep losing this water and power, commerce is going to be in so much trouble we might never recover.
I frowned, still looking at the water that bubbled up in the fountain outside. It never froze, and it was yet one more question I had about magic. If it is a small rip, why can't you close it?
The water, he said simply. The volume going in is so fast that you can't lose the rips. You're probably the only person strong enough, and I have zero idea how I'm going to explain how you got here.
Caroline, I'll even travel with him. Give me 5 minutes. I hung up and turned to them. I have to go. Write all this down, put it in your phones, copy it on another sheet, but all I can do is hope we remember when we have time. I think I'd like the help. I just don't know if I can use it, or if you'll be allowed to give it. Before either of them could say anything, I looked at Caroline. Go get Sable. I need her help. He nodded and was gone, even as I raced up the stairs. I grabbed my jacket, backpack, and his harness, and I raced back down. Then I headed into Sable and Joe's room. She'd left this morning in corporate wear. I needed her in jeans and boots. I grabbed those, a light sweater, tank top, socks, and a heavy jacket. Then I raced back to the sunroom. Sorry, either you'll have to make your own way home or wait for us. They glanced at each other.
Well, wait. Any issue with us using your study?
Shay asked. Have at it. Not like I'm worried about it, but stay out of the memento room, if the door would even open for you. Caroline stepped through that minute with Sable behind him. Cori? Caroline said it was an emergency. She was dressed in light gray slacks, a dark blue blouse, low heels, and a jacket. Here. I tossed the clothes at her. Change. I need you in Niagara. We have to close a rip. I could have kissed Sable. She didn't spend a single second asking questions or arguing. She just stripped down to her underwear with Citlali and Shay right there, pulling on clothes as fast as she could. Do you want us to come with? We might be able to help, and given the issue with the library, it might be better for us to maintain our proximities, Citlali said as she watched Sable pull on clothes with lightning speed. Can you close rips or deal with water? I asked. I knew what Shay's strengths were, but not hers. Yes to both, though I have rarely had a reason to close rips, she admitted.
You know I can close. I'm just not very strong,
Shay added to the conversation.
But I'll help if I can.
I looked at both of them, thinking. I knew Sable inside and out, but having them there might help. I headed to the hall closet and grabbed 2 jackets. January in a river was going to be colder than what we were dressed for. Here, bundle up. You ready, Sable? She was twisting her braids up into a large bun on the top of her head. Yep. Where? Niagara. Caroline, you have the location? I asked as I put the harness on him.
Roughly. I can move us closer if I need to once we see the area,
he replied as I finished buckling him in. Go. A moment later, Caroline created a rip, and we all rushed into the gray crossroad area. It closed behind Shay as he stepped through, and another one appeared, a cold breeze bursting in. We walked out onto the walkway of a hydroelectric dam. The water that should be rushing about at the bottom past it was just a trickle in comparison. There was little there but mud, a car, flapping fish, and rocks. I spun and looked on the other side to see a lake of water spinning down into a rip. Small my ass, I muttered, but I knew why he'd said that. The last one had been half a mile long. This one was less than 30 yards, but that was still capturing a lot of water. Let's go. Sable, can you divert the water as much as possible so the volume going into it is less? Yes, but it might be easier to create a dam around the rip to prevent it from going in, she said after looking at it for a minute. That I can do. The riverbed is going to be a mess for years after this, I said. That I can help with, Shay said. You start at the left and I'll start on the right. Go, I replied, and I reached out and pulled. Earth burst up at my request. There was so much of it, and its weight pulled on me. I felt an inch vaporize. I'd pulled on earth many times in my life, but prior to this, the largest I'd tried to move was a few 100 pounds. Now, I was pulling up literal tons, but I had to create a dam long enough for us to get that rip closed. The ground shook underneath us. Merlin's balls, Seatlali, Sable, can you check the structure of the dam? Make sure we aren't creating a bigger problem? I'm on it, Seatlali snapped, and I didn't look back. Either I trusted the people I was with, or we were all screwed. Shay to my left groaned, but we had the walls rising. We'd have to be fast, or the water would back up and flood areas that weren't used to flooding. I kept pulling, watching dirt, stone, and mud respond. The mixture moved upward as I pulled and shoved, the tectonic forces beneath me complaining at what I asked for. Shay and I worked toward each other. Water poured through the breaks and gaps in the rough earthen works, but I didn't care. It didn't need to be perfect, just slow the flow enough for me to close the rip. Caroline leaned up against me and I sank one hand into his fur, needing his support. If this disaster kept up much longer, I'd be resorting to blood offerings. Those, while extremely powerful, were also dangerous as you could easily offer too much. I preferred to do exposed blood to internal, harder to kill yourself that way. Got it, Shay gasped as our mud walls met in the middle. I stopped and felt my knees wobble, but I didn't have time to pay attention. I'm keeping the water back that is already there, Cori, but you need to get this rip closed. Water does not like to act like this. Sable was leaning on the railing, looking over the edge, eyes focused on the water. "'Kay," I muttered. Shay was on his knees, his once long braids mostly gone as his hair floated wild and unkempt at the shoulder level. Mine wasn't much better, riding at my ears. Too much magic lately, and I didn't see it stopping. The rip was obvious at this point, what with Sable keeping the water away. It rippled at the bottom of the ripper like a wiggling worm of unreality. I took a deep breath and reached for it. The offerings of my toenails and fingernails at the top of my mind. I grabbed and pulled, and almost fell over as it just closed. No struggle, nothing. It just let me zip it closed for minimal offering. Just like that, it vanished. I stood there for probably too long, trying to find the catch, or if I hadn't done it correctly, but it had closed. That was easy. Shay, you ready to put everything back where it was? I guess. He sounded exhausted. Let's hope it's easier than putting it up. Together, we released the earth from the formation we had forced it into. With a soft rumble, the mud flowed, the dirt became mud, and the stones sank down. That part relieved me, as I'd been worried about them tumbling forward and slamming into the plant. But the water had been working through our wall, turning everything into thick mud. The water rushed forward, slamming into the walls of the dam. something it could handle. A wave crusted up and over, and I cringed, bracing myself to get soaked. But it stopped and went around us. Ha! I don't like getting wet with clothes on, and this stuff is too full of mud to be enjoyable, Sable said with a note of pride in her voice.
I, for one, thank you. Cori would have made me take yet another bath to get that out of my fur.
Caroline sighed and sank against me.
This is not the stress-free retirement we were talking about.
Laughter slipped out as I rubbed his ears. No, it isn't. I turned to really focus on the others. Shay was gray, circles under his eyes, and his hair was almost as short as mine. For all that, he'd created half as much wall as I had. Citlali looked composed, but I noticed a few braids were shorter, and Kessis was pressed up against her, just as Caroline was. Sable seemed composed and gorgeous as always, and I just wanted to collapse in my bed in relief and exhaustion. Citlali, anything we need to know about the dam? Not that I could see. I looked through it, and there was no damage, but it would never be amiss for engineers to go through it. I was not much help here. I waved my hands tiredly. You helped? You'd be amazed at how rare that is. Most people run from danger. That is because most people aren't crazy like you are, Shay said. He'd managed to stand, but still looked like he needed a week of sleep. But that is it for me today. I need sleep and lots of vitamins. I looked at him. He seemed overly exhausted. Are you going home by yourself? No, I've been staying with Sloane, he said in an odd tone of voice. And are you going to let Sloane know you need some TLC? He blinked at me. No. I shook my head and dug out my phone. My contact list had Sloane, Scott, and various others from Rockway. I didn't dare not have access to people there, especially after Henry died. Cori, what are you doing? I'm fine, Shay protested. Hey, Sloane, I said as the line was answered on the other end. Afternoon, Miss Munroe. How may I help? He sounded confused and wary, and I didn't blame him. I don't think I'd ever called him before. We've had an exciting day. I'm sending Shay back exhausted and in need of someone to get him to bed and make sure he's eaten. He used up a huge amount of offerings today. Can you do that? Of course. He lives in my house. I'll place some orders for food to be delivered tonight. Get him home and I'll make sure he's taken care of. His voice had firmed up and sounded determined. Thank you for calling. Otherwise, he would have snuck in and I'd be trying to figure out why he was sleeping for 15 hours. Ah, he's done this before. That doesn't surprise me. I'll have him home in a minute. Thanks, I said before I hung up. Shay looked like I'd betrayed him. I don't need to be coddled. Citlali responded before I could. Yes, you do. This is what a leader does. Takes care of her people. Go. We will need you later, and the only way you will be of use to us is if you are rested. I smirked. Caroline, would you please?
Only because I think your sidestep might kill him right now,
Caroline said, though I could tell he was teasing.
I will return to take the rest of you home shortly.
He left with Shay, and I watched the churning water below us. How much more would go wrong before I could stop this? Chapter 36. Workers in Buffalo today were shunted to half shifts as the damage from the lack of power ripples down the state. Brownouts have already started, and the impact will take a week or more to recover. Already, there are calls for more sustainable energy sources. CNN Mage Focus. An hour later, Citlali and I were deposited in the house. Caroline had taken Sable back to work to pick up her car. Citlali and I sat in the sunroom, the fire stoked back up, and stared at each other. Is your life always like this? She asked after a long minute. I thought about it. Yes? No? More often than I would like? She shook her head. I am not sure why Amadahi ever thought Nara would be able to handle this. This isn't his preference. Nara is a full pacifist. He won't even eat meat, and he lets mosquitoes feed on him. She managed to keep most of the derision out of her voice. I suspected it was for the mosquito part, not the vegetarian part. In Amadahi's defense, until I was forced to participate, they all thought it was a diplomatic game. I offered, feeling guilty. In hindsight, there had been so much that I knew that the other counselors had been blindsided by. If I had taken more responsibility, would it be this bad? Or maybe it would be worse. And it is not? Sitlali wasn't accusatory, just curious. No, it is more a game of, I thought, trying to figure out how to explain it. 3-way capture the flag, where the flag is respect and perceived power. It is one of the reasons Esmere is so well known and respected. She doesn't take shit from anyone, and while she can use magic, she manages to use her claws and teeth more than her magic. To be honest, I've rarely seen as much magic from them as what I use on a daily basis. But then they're really only with me occasionally. Even Caroline rarely uses magic unless he has no choice. This stopped her. Your familiar can use magic? I shrugged. Sure. Yours can't? Sitlali stared at Kessis, who was curled up on the rug in front of the fire. Can you use magic?
Of course. I am a focus, am I not?
Kessis replied clearly. A splash of pain heralded the return of Caroline, and a moment later, he walked into the sunroom.
Why do humans persist in thinking we are just animals?
He asked, though I didn't know who that was directed to. Sitlali looked at her fox for a long time, and I just sank into the chair. On the bright side, I remember about the library, so maybe it is just denizens that can't remember. She spoke into the quiet, pulling me out of my zoning out. Oh, good. I didn't want to ask. If you had forgotten, I would have just dealt with it. I was oddly relieved that humans didn't seem to be as affected. What do you want to do? She turned her brown eyes on me, and I shrugged. I don't know, but I think I need to talk to people. Shay is going to be out for a day, and I'm not sure I'm up to anything else at this moment. What about later this week? We have dinner here. You can meet the rest of my partners. I stopped and sighed. I didn't introduce you to Sable, did I? No. I wasn't sure if that tone was amused or annoyed. Sable and Joe, my partners, live here, though we are working on moving them over to the house down the road. She lifted an eyebrow at that, and I laughed. And you haven't seen more than the back of this house. My life is complicated, and I haven't even introduced you to the Ketsos or the kids yet. So, yes, dinner at my place later this week. Now that we know, we won't forget the library. Plus, I'm taping this to my bathroom mirror. I held up the sheet of paper with the crayon scribbles on it. Sitlali laughed. That sounds good. I will check with my elders and those of other countries, but I doubt we have much. We are a young country in many ways. She rose from the chair. Kessis can take me home. I nodded as she walked toward the fox, exhaustion just pulling at me. Wait! I jerked up, pushing the desire to lay down away. Do you have a phone number? Some way to get a hold of you? Oh, she said, and started laughing. There are days where I rarely use technology, but right now that would be helpful, wouldn't it? She rattled off a number, and I entered it into my phone. I then texted her with my name, as she hadn't brought her phone with her. Thanks. I'll let you know if anything changes. But can you tell your government about the rips and what others are doing? Closing them is becoming problematic, as you can see. That might be an understatement. I will need to see if we have noticed any rips.
She paused, and for a moment I thought she might say more, but she shook her head. You are not what I expected, Citlali finally said. Consider this my shocked face, I said dryly. Let me guess. Rash, rude, a little sweet, but seems to have denizens waiting on her, yet more powerful than she acts. Citlali choked and rubbed her nose with her fingers, covering up what I thought was a smile. Add on rough around the edges and a bit dismissive, but yes. I shook my head, wishing I had coffee. Joe would need to cook dinner. If I made it to my bed, I'd be impressed. And now? She tilted her head, looking at me, not past or through, but at me. It was searching and uncomfortable. A leader, not by choice, but due to circumstances. You are in way over your head, but determined to do what needs to be done, no matter the cost.
That is why she is my queen,
Caroline murmured. You chose well, Citlali said, nodding to him. Cassis, are you ready? The fox stretched like a cat, then shook like a dog, her elegant gray fur settling back down. Yes. She opened a rip and slipped through, Citlali right behind her. I closed and I glanced at the clock. Only 4. It felt like I'd been up for days already. Joe, can you get dinner or something? Or cook? I barely moved the phone when there was a ding. Way ahead of you. Sable called. I've got the kids. We are picking up Ty. And yes, I'm getting Caroline his spicy shrimp. Joe must really love you. She's getting you Ty's spicy shrimp, I said after I replied with a thanks.
Of course. I am lovable and she is a smart queen,
he replied amicably. He'd splayed back out in front of the fireplace and was grooming his paws. Thoughts on those two? I asked, curious as to his viewpoint.
The woman is deadlier than you might think. They didn't mention what they hunted, but I know what roams in the beast's lands. Cassis is swift, smart, and deadly. She may look like a fox and lacks my thumbs, but she has razor claws and can become bigger than Esmere when needed, though not big enough for Citlali to ride.
He paused, tongue extended.
I like them.
A soft chuckle escaped me. Me too. What about the library? It was part test, part question.
I believe we are meant to find it. Shay mentioned it to Sloane when I took him home, so they have not forgotten.
His ears laid back.
Though, if that effect ever disappears, and everyone remembers it, they will not be happy.
Of course. Still, that isn't my doing, no matter what Bricks might say. But we need a plan, and soon. I pulled up the calendar on my phone. It was only January 3rd. It felt like a lifetime had passed today. Next weekend is good for a dinner, but I think I'll leave Stephen and Indira off the list. They both have competing loyalties.
Agreed. We need babies to settle him down and teach him to bend more. His thinking is too inflexible.
I choked, trying to fight back laughter. Not Indira?
She is a smart woman and has no need of humbling, though I suspect he would not want children with anyone else, so she might have to suffer.
This time the laughter did come through. When I could breathe again, I looked at him. You do realize she is in her 60s and mostly well past her childbearing years, right?
So soon? That is a shame. Then perhaps they should keep the twins and the Ketzos for a week. I am sure that would humble him.
I just chuckled. You have strange views on children.
They are important, but they seem to remove most of your stiffness quickly. It is rather nice.
That it is. We have to learn to play with them. I brushed the conversation away and started setting up things for a dinner in a week. Halfway through, I paused. Caroline, do you think there's anything in the memento room that might help? His hind leg was up in the air as he licked the fur.
That room is full of mysteries and other things, so I could not say. But you can look.
The idea of climbing the stairs made me want to cry. I choked it down. No matter how tired I was, nothing would change or stop the rips if I didn't get my ass in gear. I leveraged myself to my feet and trudged to the stairs. Moving felt easier the more I did, and by the time I reached the top stair, my muscles had loosened up, and I felt a bit better. Not a lot, but at least I didn't think my knees were about to buckle. I pushed open the door and stood looking at the room. The two statues left seemed to judge me with their immovable expressions. I flipped them off. There were so many things in here, but I'd touched all the memory stones, and none of them mentioned the undoing, at least not like that. Everything else were things that James had regarded as precious or rare. But staring at them made me think of something, and I went into my study and pulled out the phoenix heart and his little notebook. Back in the room, I put them on a far shelf. The room wasn't a safe, but most of the time we forgot it was here, and that sounded like an excellent idea. I was still going through all the notebooks James had left, but the majority of them I had read. But I hadn't asked Georgaz. Georgaz, do you have a minute? I looked longingly at the chair, but I feared if I sat down, I'd never manage to get back up. A burst of sweet-smelling flames heralded his arrival. A perch snuck out of the wall, reaching for him as he hovered.
Cori, I'm glad to see you are okay. The stories of what happened in the council chambers are the talk of the realms.
I laughed. I'm glad to hear I still entertain people. Do you know anything about the undoing, or what Brix is rambling about? He lit on the perch and twisted his head to look at me.
Not really. I know of it, when earth and magic separated, but not much else.
Merlin, I sighed. I thought you were immortal.
Yes and no. Immortal in that we don't die of old age. We simply egg to be hatched again. But I am only about 300 of your years. We do not reproduce. My parents were killed not long after my hatching, so if they had been around, then I would not be aware.
He flipped his wings at me.
I know this is not much help.
It is more than I had. By the way, I put the phoenix heart in the memento room. It seemed like a good place for it.
That will work. I have hoped the Herald will have use of it one day. Something that will be for the good of all, not something dark and twisted.
I'd just settled that it sits in the corner until it crumbles into dust. Oh well. I've got some freeze-dried strawberries if you'd like to try those. They are downstairs. It gave me a reason to keep moving. Otherwise, my bed was so close.
That would be wonderful, Cori,
he trilled, but I couldn't help but feel I wasn't asking the right questions. Chapter 37.
The formulation of the problem is often more essential than its solution, which may be merely a matter of mathematical or experimental skill.
Albert Einstein. We set a dinner date for 2 weeks out. I needed to talk to humans about the situation going on, so Tursane and Esmere were not invited. We compromised on Ericina attending, as Caroline and Kessis would be there also. The twins and Ketzos were having dinner with Grandma, giving us some space. It surprised no one that Fish was the star of the dinner. I looked around the table, checking on everyone. Jo was at one end, Sable next to her. I sat at the other end. On my right was Charles, then Shay. On my left was Citlali, Kessis, and Caroline on the chair nearest me. Ericina was in Charles' ever-present hoodie. She'd peeked out to wave at people, then scrambled back in. The conversation stayed to general chit-chat until most of the eating had slowed down. I faced the inevitable and started the conversation. We need to talk about the rips. They all quieted down, looking at me. It felt odd to not have Stephen and Indira here, but for now, I didn't want to put them in an uncomfortable position. I asked Charles to look at some data for me and compare it to what was presented by the OMO at my ambush presentation. That last was a bit sour. I was still annoyed about that.
Asking before dessert is just mean, you know,
he said as he got up to grab his laptop from his bag. Joe grabbed his plate and moved it out of the way. He nodded thanks as he sank back down.
Here is what I have. The energy levels are increasing, though it isn't as obvious a ratio as the Alma wanted you to think. If I had to guess, it is seeking out low magic areas given the reactions.
Wait, what? That made no sense to me.
Basically, the rips seem to be forming more where there are fewer magic users. Big open areas or areas with lots of non-mages,
he said as he typed on the laptop.
What makes you say that?
Citlali asked, her gaze focused.
Believe it or not, the Amish.
Charles turned his laptop so we could see it. It showed a map of the U.S. with small and large circles in various areas. A lot in areas even I recognized as mostly mountains.
They are historically almost never mages, or only hedge mages. Those who do emerge end up leaving, or never using magic if they are hedgy. In the last month, we've had at least 6 rips. None really big appear there. There are also spikes in sensors across the United States for areas in state parks and rural areas. Now, we are still getting them in populated areas, but those are bigger and angrier, for lack of a better word.
I need you to explain. I admit it. You've been looking at the data, and I haven't.
Basically, the ones in rural or low magic areas are occurring more often, but they are small without much effect, and they aren't letting very many creatures out. The huge ones in populated areas cause damage, and usually have things trying to cross or come in. These are the ones that are getting the government up in arms.
Huh. Citlali said slowly. That matches with what we've seen. All of us have seen little ones on the plains or in the hunting areas, but they close easily and we've ignored them. But the 2 large ones have opened in populated areas, and both of those were difficult to seal. All of them with something coming through, but our focuses usually dissuaded them.
My problem is I have access to U.S. data. I also have the information you've given me about China, but I can't tell you what else is going on across the world. We know the U.S. and China are both planning on attacking rips. For all that, Stephen is trying to dissuade them. But without active information, I can't really tell you more than what I just did.
Charles shrugged and closed his laptop.
Get me more data, or convince the OMO to let me get access to their computers, and I might come up with a different answer.
I rubbed my face, pushing my empty plate back. So, again, information. Even if we find the library, that won't tell us how humans are reacting. The news doesn't have anything else? This I directed to anyone, but Charles answered.
Yes and no. I can tell you Russia's mobilizing tanks in various areas. Japan has pulled all their warships back to their coastline. Australia is doing more drills, but none of them are admitting what it is for or why. I don't think anyone really wants to face what is going on or admit how they are reacting.
He sighed too.
Bottom line, if this keeps up, I can't see them not doing what you know we are doing.
I snorted. Humans. I tapped my fingers on the table, but I'd come into this out of ideas. Does anyone have any ideas? Because the only thing I've got is seeing if the library is real. And while I'm going to try, I don't know if it will give me anything useful.
I have a question,
Sable said. We all looked at her.
Caroline, Ericina, Kestis, do you know other familiars or focuses? I mean, we all know Caroline knows Tietang, but what about others in other countries?
You could almost feel the slap of realization as we all turned to our familiars. Ericina crawled down Charles' arm to participate in the discussion.
I know a few, many from the awards banquet years ago. The Arales was from Spain.
Caroline said slowly.
I hunted with a not bear from Russia, but I don't know what or who is mages.
Aratina, no, Chitarians and Gorgons. We weave, trade. Not many focus.
Her high, chittering voice had a note of apology.
That is a good question, Kesset said, thinking. Most of the ones I know are all part of our lands. You are the first I have interacted with that are not of the nation.
Sable shrugged. Oh well, it was an idea. But for future options, it might be good to encourage the focuses to have friends and connections of their own. We fell back into silence. Shay twisted his hair, obviously uncomfortable with its short length.
What about asking Scott?
About? I replied. Scott Randolph was a friend, kind of. He'd been a rogue mage hunter once, even had a movie made about him.
He's retired, but he knows lots of them, and they interacted all over the world. Some of the mages they hunted should never have been born, much less emerged. They weren't nice people. You might have contacts that would know what is going on in their own countries.
Shay shrugged.
Though I'm not sure what difference knowing how close we are to doomsday clock striking 12 really makes. If we can't get the Herald to a point where she can stop this from happening, it's all just a ticking bomb.
I sighed. I know. I guess I was hoping. So, we need to find the library or nail Bricks to a tree and pull it out of him. For a minute, the image of Bricks nailed to a tree like the poor girl I had found when I had just moved to Atlanta flashed through my mind, and I shuddered. Never mind. Just force him to tell us? If we could, Sitlali said. I talked to my elders, and they know nothing. We don't even have many stories past 1,000 years, and those we do are awfully universal. Universal? Jo asked as she started to collect plates. And remember, I have angel food cake and ice cream for dessert. Floods, earthquakes, coyote, raven, nothing that relates to real people that we can tell. Mostly learning tales. Like messing with porcupines ends with new holes in your skin. We fell silent as I got up to help Jo, and everyone else seemed lost in their thoughts. When I came back, Shay just shrugged forlornly.
I got nothing. This wasn't really what I thought it would be, and to a certain extent, I feel like we are trying to fight nature.
I felt like someone had poked me. Well, aren't we? We do it all the time. Everyone just looked at me with blank faces. Think about it. We build dams, fire breaks, set up sandbags, alter the flow of rivers. We do this all the time. Why can't we control the flow of magic?
Because it's never been done before?
Shay asked slowly. I just laughed. Of course not. One of the things I've noticed about the denizens, and Caroline, Kessis, Erichina, I don't mean this as an insult, but they aren't tool users or inventors. The Valkyrie are the most human-like, and I'll lay you money everything they have are things humans did first. The Naga, Gorgons, and a few more are the only ones with actual hands. The Cath only use their thumbs occasionally. They still focus on magic, or what we'd regard as naturalistic behaviors. We need to show them how to harness, or maybe put a stopper in the magic deluge. I was excited as I said this, visuals of magic flowing like a river.
Cori,
Caroline said slowly. Don't you think it's a great idea? We'd be able to harness it and use it for other things. I was so excited, and everyone just looked at me like I'd grown another head. Caroline spoke again.
Cori, I do not disagree, but magic is more insubstantial than the wind, and it took humans centuries to consistently harness the wind with sails for ships. And aren't your wind turbines something that only developed in the last few decades for anything major?
Sure, but we know how to do magic, and Sable works with water. The principles have to be the same. Sable cleared her throat, and I looked at her, feeling my heart fall at her look.
Cori, I think you were right, and it's a brilliant idea. But you were talking years, if not decades, of work to figure out how to isolate and channel something that we barely understand. Unless you stumble across a manual telling us exactly how to control magic, we'll never figure it out in time to stop the attacks on the Rips. Her gentle voice wormed its way through my excitement, and I slowly deflated. Oh, now that you say that, it's obvious.
So, we're back at the library.
Back at the library, Jo said. She headed into the kitchen and came back with cake and ice cream, dropping a kiss on my head as she came back in. But maybe you can make that your retirement project. You have 2 engineers that could help you. I nodded, still feeling like there was something there. But I let it go as we kept talking. But bricks and the possibility of the library telling us something were the only things we could come up with. With a note of frustration, Sitlali and Shay agreed to be ready to go tomorrow and head into Spirit, starting at Tursane's. Maybe we could find it quickly, but somehow I didn't think it would be that easy. We were just saying goodbye when a spike of pain had me looking at the backyard. I walked into the sunroom to check. Tietang writhed there, his whiskers drooping. I headed outside with most everyone following. Tietang, what's up?
I wanted you to know. It is decided. The next major Rip that appears, we will attack. Shishi is starting with missiles, but her advisors are recommending having small nukes available if the Rips continue.
He had curled up in a ball.
She won't listen, but many people have died, and they are demanding she do something.
What? Why have people died? I questioned, going in to rub his brow.
One of the Rips happened in a large park with many families and kids. A large lizard with teeth and tail came out. It stared at people and they froze. It killed dozens before a sniper killed it from another building.
Basilisk,
Caroline hissed.
They are animals, and they stun anyone they look at. Then they kill and eat their prey.
I sighed. I'm trying, Tietang. We're going to see if we can find the answer tomorrow.
Hurry, Cori. I don't want to see what might happen if they get scared enough to launch the nukes.
Chapter 38.
Few countries have active nuclear arsenals after the devastation in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, but that doesn't mean there aren't nuclear weapons. Many have been decommissioned as mages refuse to work them, given the known instability around magic use. However, there are still many deadly missiles out there, which is why the satellite images of China moving its Dongfeng missiles in unprecedented numbers is very stressful.
CNN Mage Focus. Shay and Sitlali were ready to go by 8 a.m. Shay didn't even complain, but his mood improved when I handed him Mexican coffee. Sanchez's recipe was still my go-to after all these years. So much chocolate and caffeine, it would wake the dead. Shay wore boots, jeans, a jacket, and a backpack, and interestingly, a walking stick made of metal. "That isn't what I expected you to bring," I said, pointing to it.
"Sloan made me take it. It unscrews and it has a spear if I need it. I'm so short on offerings, I figured a bit of an advantage wasn't to be ignored."
I couldn't disagree and made a mental note to add one to my bag. Sitlali, on the other hand, showed up in leather leggings and a long coat of beige hide with a powerful recurve bow and a pack. I noted that she had knives strapped to her waist and arms. "I'm not sure if I'm underdressed or over," I commented as I looked at my clothes, mostly from hiking stores recommended by the S&R people. My pack was crammed full this time. I wasn't taking any chances. "It is my normal hunting gear, minus the coat. But if we end up camping out, the coat will be useful." She moved in it like a ghost, and I had to admit, it seemed a part of her. But then so had the leather biker jacket.
Come here, Caroline, I said, and pulled out the harness. He flicked his ears back, but let me strap it on him. Why that? Citlali asked as Kessis watched with matching laid-back ears. Mostly it is for the people we run into on Earth. It helps convince them he's harmless. They both looked at me with unbelieving expressions. Caroline, harmless? I shrugged. If he has a leash, he's suddenly a pet. I never said people were smart. Citlali and Shay both laughed a bit at that. So, why now? Citlali pressed. Because it carries food for him, a bowl for water, some booties, and a brush. All stuff he could need, and therefore he carries when practical. I finished clipping him in and letting him shake to make sure it was settled correctly. Kessis, don't you think that sounds like an excellent idea? Citlali said softly, still watching us.
No, I do not.
The fox had her ears back and wasn't impressed by the idea at all.
Besides, if I changed size, it would cause issues.
True, but I like the idea of letting you carry a few things for your own needs, like the bowl and brush. Citlali looked like she was sketching out ideas in her head, if her twitching hands were any indication. The fox twitched ears and tail, but just turned away, refusing to respond. I find myself suddenly glad I don't have a familiar, though I have to say neither Dolly nor Elzeba are this ornery. Shay was looking back and forth between the two animals.
Dolly is a canine. She is all heart and no brains. Elzeba is similar to the Quetzos. Intelligent, but not civilized in the best word.
Caroline had stalked forward and opened the door to the backyard.
Are we ready, or are you going to continue to avoid what needs to be started?
His words acted like a prod, and we had been delaying. I sighed and followed him out. Tersanes, please? Caroline just twitched a tail at me and opened a rip. This time we went directly there, stepping out into the warm sand in the grotto. A chime echoed as we stepped out, and a minute later, a large snake came slithering out, head raised and a hood expanding. It postured in oblivious threat. My name is Cori. I'm here to see Tersane. I pitched my voice to Carrie so that we didn't get attacked. I had zero doubt that Caroline could eliminate the snake prior to it getting close enough to cause an issue, but that would be a bad omen to start that trip. The snake stopped, the hood collapsing, and it turned and slithered back into the entrance of what looked like a Greek temple. A minute later, Tersane came out, looking elegant and beautiful. She wore the scarf I'd given her, draped around her neck, various snakes holding it in their teeth and twisting underneath it, like it was a toy.
Cori, lords, to what do I owe this visit?
Her voice was wary, and I hated feeling like I was using her, but I didn't know of any way to do this. Morning, Tersane. I wanted to remind you we were going to search the spirit realm today for the Library of Magic. I spoke clearly and fastened my eyes on her face, watching for recognition. She blinked, her eyes lighting up with a eureka moment.
Of course! Why didn't I think of that? The library will surely have the answers you need. I can't believe we didn't go there. Think of it. It is right over.
She turned as she spoke, her arm starting to point to a path leading out of her grotto. Tersane stopped, her arm hovering in mid-air. She turned to look at me again, a frown creasing her face.
Where? Did you need me to show you something?
The idea of anything removing memories like that, made me want to throw up. Yet another dark side of magic. No, we need to head into the realm, and I wanted to clear it with you first. Is that okay? The words carefully chosen as any lie would spring out at her.
Of course. Be aware of doors and paths to pockets, but the spirit realm welcomes you. Just be careful. It is not as welcoming as your world is.
She smiled again, and I heard Shay clear his throat as the scarf was pulled up by the snakes to expose her breasts. Thank you. I'll let you know if I find anything we need you to explain or perhaps grease the way. I'm hoping as the Herald Magic might guide our way to what can help.
Ah, yes. That sounds wonderful.
She pointed to a different path.
That will lead you to the heart of it. Please do come back by some time.
With a nod, she headed back into her home, the snakes bouncing up and down in their approximation of a wave.
That is...
Shay started, but I shushed him. We headed down the path she had first indicated, and I raised my hand every time either of them started to speak until we'd been walking for at least 10 minutes. The area was sparse and craggy, but a path led away from the water you could hear on the other side of her walls. We safe to speak yet, Caroline? I asked. I didn't slow down my pace as his ears twitched back and forth.
Yes, I can no longer hear the fountain or the waves. I doubt anything will be directly overheard, and I sense no sentient near us at this moment.
His voice was easy, and his tail was a normal sway, not an agitated swish. You were saying, Shay? I slowed down to look at the two humans. I'd set a decent pace, and Shay was a bit winded, but Sitlali looked like we were out for a casual stroll.
That was uncomfortable to watch. She knew. Then it was wiped away. I am very unhappy with the idea of magic doing that to me.
He cleared his throat as we continued. Agreed, but I don't know what else to do at this point, I said in a frustrated mutter. She's a friend, and has been for years at this point. All I can do is try to work within the stupid game I find myself in.
It is discomforting, but I find it interesting she had full recollection until her eyes turned from you. It makes me wonder if there is more we are missing than just the herald aspect, especially since Shay didn't forget, and he doesn't have a focus.
Sitlali didn't pause her stride as she spoke. Kessa scampered ahead, disappearing behind trees and rocks. Her fur blended into this wilderness perfectly. Caroline, with his ruby-red coat, stood out just a bit.
And why would magic hide this place?
Shay huffed as he spoke, and I slowed down a bit more. Well, when I went there, it was a setup more like a museum. And trust me, there were things I wanted to read and stare at. I was so tempted. My voice got softer, remembering the death book, and some of the others, not to mention the jewelry. But I also don't know how much was staged versus what it is really like, or heck, if it is more than just a traveling bookmobile. Shay snickered at that comment, but Sitlali just looked at me, confused. Never mind. A social commentary joke. I waved it off. It wasn't important to explain. We kept wandering up the path, though it had changed from the craggy mountain to a more lush forest. The sounds of life were picking up with birds in the trees and rustles in the leaves and needles.
Do you have any idea where we're going?
Shay asked after another 10 minutes of walking. We were deep in the forest now, and the diffused light was all but blocked out, putting us into dark shadows. Not really, I admitted. I know it is in this realm, but not where. I looked around, but there wasn't anything here to guide me. Caroline had slipped into the trees, and neither he nor Kessis were visible.
So we just walk forever?
His voice held all the doubt that rattled around my own head. We are trusting magic wants us to find the library, Sitlali answered. Exactly, but be warned, magic likes challenges, and most of the denizens do. I was getting the feeling we were being watched. Caroline, is something out there? I sent it privately, not wanting to alarm anyone.
Yes, we are hunting it,
Caroline replied in my mind. I shot a look at Sitlali, who stiffened for a moment, then continued her smooth pace.
Which means what?
Shay asked, his breathing finally back to normal now that we weren't climbing up a hill, and we were moving at a slower pace.
Ambush,
Citlali said as she drew her bow and set an arrow. I just stopped in the trail, set my feet, and waited. Earth was more problematic to use in the realms, but I was done being nice.
Incoming,
Caroline called in time with a crashing sound. Out of the woods burst a bear that made even our Kodiaks look like a stuffed animal. I had no idea of how anything that large could have moved through the forest and not have sounded like a herd of elephants. It rose up on its hind legs and roared. The sound hit physically and mentally. That told me everything. "Don't shoot!" I snapped out to Citlali, and at the same time I said, "No," very firmly, and mentally popped it, as if I'd hit it with a newspaper on the nose. I'd figured out how Esmere did it, and was doing the same thing, though I popped it much harder than she popped the Quetzos. It jerked its head back. The roar cut off mid-sound. It blinked tiny eyes at us and dropped back to all fours. Caroline sprang out of the trees and dropped in front of it, hissing, with his fur standing on end. Kessis appeared a moment later looking about the same size as Esmere, her fur tipped with what looked like sparks of electricity, fangs bared. "No!" I popped it again, the way I would have popped a misbehaving dog. It whined and sank back. "Go!" Another mental swat. It huffed out a sigh and lumbered off to the side and toward the trees. My shoulders sagged in relief. That had been really lucky. "What by the great spirits did you do?" I turned to see Citlali standing there, her bow pointed to the ground, and a look of surprise on her face that was matched with a rolled eye from Shay.
"She was being Cori. Nothing ever works the way you think it should."
Indeed. I was looking forward to that fight. It would have been a nice challenge, and we could have had roast bear for dinner.
Caroline all but pouted his response, glaring at me. I threw my hands up in the air and started walking, only for the ground to give out underneath me. Chapter 39. The current death count from the rips is 50 in the U.S., which isn't even the number of people that die from car accidents a day. However, in Australia, it is over 70, and France saw 90 get killed in the last month. As the rips in reality continue, the death toll is going to rise. CNN, Mage Focus. I didn't have time to react before I slammed into the ground, feet first, but the fall threw me onto my back and knocked out all my air. I lay there gasping, staring up at the opening of light much further above me than I was happy with. A second later, a calf, fox, woman, and man all peered in, looking down at me.
"My queen, are you okay?"
Caroline said. His former annoyance vanished, and now just concern. I didn't respond instantly, still trying to remember how to breathe. "Yeah," I gasped out as I sucked in another lung full of air. "Not hurt. Winded." I levered myself up and sat there, head on my knees as I let the spinning stop.
"How are we going to get you up here?"
Shay asked, his voice echoing down the hole. I lifted my head and asked fire to play out in my hand for a moment, feeding it sawdust. It burst into light and danced on my palm as I looked around. I was in a long, low tunnel that had obviously been carved from stone and wasn't natural at all. It also felt vaguely familiar. It extended into the darkness and disappeared to my left, while to my right was a wall not 10 feet away. "Actually, I think you need to come down here," I managed to say. The words had barely left my mouth when Caroline and Kessis sprang down. That distracted me enough, I let the flame die, but there still seemed to be some light.
"I really don't want to use Earth to get down there,"
Shay said as he looked down at me. "No worries. This is why I still hunt with a bow, Sitlali said. Even from here, I could hear humor in her voice. Ack! Shay yelped. I looked up to see him floating down, with Sitlali right behind. Air is my domain, in and out. Her voice had a joy that rippled through the air. Are you sure you're okay? She directed this question at me. Yeah, just knocked the wind out of me and gave me a few new bruises. Nothing new there. I looked around. The tunnel led on. This is made, not an animal hole, regardless of how large. This was made, and that is a bit too coincidental. Ah, I see what you mean. Shay spun slowly. Only one way to go. And since we have a flyer here, we can always backtrack if we need to. I nodded. I created little flames that flickered on the walls, and we started down the tunnel. The rock had been chiseled, but it was plain and unornamented. It was about a foot over Sitlali's head, and the air was cool. I snuffed out the fires as we passed them, just because it took energy to pull food in to keep the flames alive. We had walked for 3 minutes, when suddenly the cave ended, and the library appeared on the other side of a chasm. It's the library, like it was when I visited. I looked at the chasm and smiled. Except this time there is a bridge that might support my weight. This time? Shay asked, giving the bridge an appropriately dubious look. I started to respond, stopped, and looked at the bridge again. Sitlali, how good are you at flying people? Very, she said with a smirk. You want to fly us over? The bridge is temperamental, I said as I narrowed my eyes at the bridge. As if it heard us, it turned into an ice bridge and began to melt like a blowtorch was held to it. So I see, Sitlali said as she leaned over to look at the chasm. We sure about this? I burst out in laughter. Not at all, but I haven't come up with any other options. Sitlali didn't say anything. Instead, air just wrapped around us and carried us over to the other side. It seemed strangely anticlimactic, but at this point, that didn't strike me as a bad thing. She set us down much more gently than I could have managed, and I stood peering at the steps and the huge doors. It seemed almost the same, but also somehow different. Wait, I said as I stared at it, trying to remember. The place had the same imposing architecture as before. With the pillars and pointed roof, it still reminded me of a temple as much as a library. But this time, there were no gargoyles, and the doors weren't ajar. Caroline, are gargoyles real? I asked, looking at the empty tops of the pillars.
Gargoyles? Your stone statues?
He sounded confused. Yes, large beasties with wings, claws, fangs, and turned to stone?
No, we don't know of creatures like that, though we have hunted elephants, but their fur doesn't make them look very rock-like.
Kessis sat at Sitlali's feet, staring at the building. Wait, elephants have fur? Shay looked at the fox with a confused look. When you are hunting woolly mammoths, they have fur, Sitlali said. I opened my mouth, then snapped it close. I didn't have time to follow up on that right now. Noted. Last time, the doors were open. Right now, they were firmly shut. A creak grabbed my attention, and over to the side of the building was a door that was closer to a normal human size, 10 feet tall, not the 20-foot main doors. I suspect maybe patrons under there? The other two looked at me and shrugged. I glanced back up at the empty gargoyles' posts. What had they looked like? I couldn't remember. They had just been there. Figures that I dismissed. Right at that moment, I wished that time travel actually worked. But while you could step out of time, freeze it around you, if there was a way to go back in time, I didn't know it. The collective attitude seemed to be why the fuck not? And we started to climb the stairs. Everything remained quiet as we went up to the main door. The steps were just as intimidating as before, but the door swung open quietly, and I stepped in. The heat of Shay and Sitlali letting me know they were close. Last time it had been like wandering into a museum, full of cases, lights, books, and objects on display. This time, it felt like a library. We were in a foyer, and to the right was a large desk with books stacked on it. Past it were rows and rows of shelves that had to be at least 12 feet high. There were ladders attached to each bookcase. Instinctively, I looked up and breathed a sigh of relief when I verified the imposing cases were anchored into the ceiling, which was stone. This isn't what it was last time, I murmured. The others stepped around me, standing in the foyer, and I took 2 steps back to look at the giant doors, then stepped in again. Halfway in between the doors was a wall. Or maybe it was just a different part of the library? Caroleon sat looking at all this, his tail twitching. Kessis almost mimicked him, but she was still, as if she'd been carved out of resin. The gray of her coat looked almost blue in the diffused light. There was no one behind the desk, but as I walked over, I also didn't see a coating of dust. "Now what?" Shay asked. I took a deep breath, trying to come up with a plan, but other than searching for something like the undoing, I didn't have a clue. "I guess we—"
"Cori, Hamadia has a message."
Caroleon interrupted. It threw me off my thought process, and I had to think for a minute to get myself on track. "From?"
"Alexant. He says they are having another meeting this afternoon. He wants you there."
Caroleon's tail twitched in annoyance. "Who is Alexant?" Sitlali asked, and I blinked at her. "Oh, you don't know. Shay, do you know him?" Shay shrugged. "He was at the wedding and the baby shower. I know he's like FBI or something, but that is the extent of what I know." Basically, he's the director of magical crimes, and the government and the OMO have put him in charge of the RIPS. But the military and political pressure is getting extreme. He's called me in because I'm powerful enough to close most of the RIPS without issue. Plus, he's trying to avoid them reactivating my draft. I paused and looked at her. "You do know about the draft?" She nodded. "Are you going to go?" I huffed a laugh. "Huh, there is no way. I'm not positive magic would even let us back. Caroleon, could you find this place again? The way you can find Tersanes?" His ears twitched back and forth.
"Maybe. Let me try something."
A spike of pain, and he stepped away from us. I felt the loss. It was odd how much I leaned on him. A minute passed, then 2. My panic started to rise. Then a spike, and he stepped back. This time his hackles were raised and his tail was puffed.
"The answer to that is no. I could find you. I could not find this place. It is blocked. But I could travel to you."
"That is interesting, and very good to know," Sitlali said slowly. "Kessis, would you mind testing that out?" The fox nodded and disappeared in a flash of pain that was gone before I could even wince. Again, we waited. I buried my hands in Caroleon's fur to verify that he was really there. I knew I could sidestep home, but we needed to keep this place accessible. This time, 3 minutes passed before Kessis returned. "He is correct. I can find you, but until I step to you, this place is unable to be seen. I am not sure how to explain it." "Kessis, Caroleon, if you were stepping to us, could you bring someone else?" I asked, my mind whirling. They looked at each other, then away. The private conversation was just at the edge of my mental hearing. Enough I could tell they were talking, but not that I could hear it.
"Yes,"
Caroleon finally answered.
Hamadia asked if there was a message to pass. Apparently, Alexant is on the phone.
"Oh, yeah, tell him I have a conflict that cannot be rescheduled. It relates to possibly stopping the RIPS."
I can't guarantee when I'll be available. Nothing in that was a lie. And besides, if Hamadi was relaying it, there wasn't any way to know if the statement was true.
Done.
He pressed up against me, and I sighed. That does give us options, Sitlali said. From your questions, I suspect we are on the same page. And yes, it would make more sense for me to stay here. I am well used to camping in the wilderness. Sleeping here would not be an issue, especially if Kessis can find me. I nodded, relieved she'd seen the same thing.
I'm glad you two are okay with that. My body isn't,
Shay said, looking around.
But it means the time we have is still getting shorter. So where do we start?
A bang sounded in the depths of the library, and I spun, looking for what created the sound. Kessis and Caroline were both on their feet, noses in the air, sniffing. Soft clicks and creaks started moving toward us, with a ponderousness that had me readying a KO spell. Don't call fire. We can't risk damaging this knowledge, I hissed.
Something is coming. I do not know that smell. It is cat, yet not. It is unknown.
Caroline growled in my mind. His body was tensed as the shadows moved to our left, and as one, we pivoted to face what was coming. My heart tried to lodge in my chest, but I pushed it down. Whatever it was, I'd deal. Like everyone said, I was the Herald. I'd face whatever was coming. Click, click, pad, pad. The sounds were of Caroline walking through the house, claws clicking the wood, but a warm, dusty smell reached my nose. Definitely not Kath. The shadows parted as globes at the end of each bookshelf sprang into bright luminescence, revealing a sphinx stepping out to glare at us. Chapter 40. For the first time in over 100 years, the AIN has sent representatives to the White House to discuss opening the borders between our countries. Arrangements are still being discussed, but both political insiders and newcomers to this arena are abuzz with the possible opportunities and changes this might make in the political landscape. No one knows the technology level of the AIN, and it will be a slow process, but it is possible the walls might fall, allowing the U.S. and the AIN to interact once again. CNN Mage Focus. The Sphinx's head came to just under the second to the top shelf of the bookcases. I could tell the Sphinx was female, with a tunic on her top, long hair and dark braids that were pulled back into a tail at the base of her skull. Her face was an odd mixture between human and cat. She took another step out of the shadows to reveal a leonine body with dark burgundy fur and tufted tail that swept from side to side, brushing the tops of books. Now I know why there's no dust. The irreverent thought zoomed through my mind as we stared at her. She opened her mouth, and I tensed, waiting for an attack. "Do you have your library cards?" The voice was rich, echoing through the library, yet it wasn't that loud. Oddly, at least to my ears, she had an English accent. She continued on toward us. "If not, you can request them here." We moved back almost in unison as she moved toward us and settled down behind the desk that I had thought absurdly large. Apparently not. "Well?" She stared at us with amber eyes that told me nothing except they resembled Esmere's. I cleared my throat. Yes? I mean, we need to get library cards. We need to research something?" My voice might have squeaked a bit at that last part. It was more that even after all the denizens I'd met, there was something about meeting a sphinx that just threw me for a loop. "That is why the library is here. Please enter your name and magical signature here." A clipboard lifted up from under the counter and settled on top. I moved toward her, still unsure if I was going to be attacked or not. The only expression I could get from her was curiosity, nothing that made me think she would attack, other than being a sphinx. As I looked at the form, I tried to remember what I knew about sphinx, and the answer was not much. They asked riddles, and there was one in Egypt. That covered it. The form was relatively straightforward, other than it was on papyrus, not paper. The top declared Library of Magic, library card application. It wanted my name, realm, and a square box. A quill and ink appeared on the desk. I filled out my name, listed Earth as the realm, but stopped at the box. How do I do a magical signature? Push your senses at the box and think of calling magic. I followed the instructions, and the box glowed a tiny bit. Excellent. Here's your library card. She glanced at the rest of us. Do any of you wish to receive a library card? We all glanced at each other, shrugged, and Shay moved up to get his library card. Caroline was directly behind him. Can you read? Citlali asked, looking at the card Caroline slipped into his harness. He had badges often enough, so we created a slot for identity cards and things for him. Yes, he said, flicking his tail at her. Kessis? Citlali looked like someone had slapped her. I was really hard on people's view of reality. Yes? No? The fox twitched her tail from side to side, the white tip mesmerizing. I know words. I can recognize them, but reading from a book? I do not believe so. Citlali blinked, then took a deep breath. I and my focus would like cards, please. The Sphinx gave us a blinding smile, revealing even human-like teeth, except for the very long, sharp canines. Here is the form. Another form floated up to the top, and it took a bit for all of us to get cards, but soon enough, we were all in possession of library cards. I took a minute to examine mine. Made of a thin metal, it had my name engraved on it, then the symbols of magic, each filled in fully. It was like when I pushed my magic signature into the form, it had weighed and measured my magic. Caroline, may I see yours? He flipped an ear at me, and I suspected he was laughing, but he pulled it out and handed to me. His name was there also, but instead of each of the symbols of magic, it had a chaos symbol that was strong in entropy and time. Then there was an arrow with my name next to it. Interesting. I handed it back to him. Everyone else had received theirs, and we stood there aimlessly. I felt like face-palming. This was a library. We had a librarian. Excuse me, do you have a name? I hadn't seen a plaque or anything, and she didn't wear a name tag. You may call me Cleo, she said after a minute. Thank you, Cleo. We are researching the Undoing. Do you have any information on that? I asked, hope spurting up into me. The Undoing. She tilted her head to one side, suddenly looking very cat-like. Do you know the time period or another name for it? At least 3,000 years ago. Caroline, Kessis, do you know of any other names? That flame of hope that had been so bright and fierce died down when she didn't instantly recognize the name. Caroline looked at me.
The Cath called it the sweet food devastation,
he offered. The Sphinx shook her head. Then I do not know of what you seek. However, you are welcome to browse the shelves. She waved at the expanse of the library. Are there card catalogs? Shay asked. I wasn't sure what those were. College had every book listed in the computer. You'd do searches to find the books. Of course. Cleo rose up and padded around the desk and walked over to what I'd dismissed as a large apothecary system. It was about 6 feet tall, 10 feet long, and about a foot deep. They're all in here. Shay narrowed his eyes. How are they listed? The drawers from 1 to 20 are alphabetical by author, known name, then family name, and the drawers from 21 to 40 are alphabetical by title. Her voice sounded like every other librarian's voice, proud and helpful. Shay, however, flinched. Only by that? You don't use the Dewey Decimal System or category system. Cleo drew back, a bit affronted. Of course, there is a system. It is listed at the end of each column. Shay started to sigh in relief when she continued. Shelves are arranged by language, then by author. We are the only library in the realms, so we make sure people can find what they are looking for. Shay said slowly, and I had to agree with his hesitation. How many are in English? Cleo blinked at us. English? Modern English? She stood there thoughtfully for a moment. I believe there was one patron about 200 years ago that donated a few books in that language. Yes, the two donated were a mythology book called the Bible, and the other was an English copy of the work of Marcus Aurelius. A poor translation, I must say. I just looked at her. None of them are in English? She laughed, a ripple of sound that in any other situation I might have enjoyed listening to. Not as much. Magic allows us to all speak English, as I am now, but it is a young language, barely 300 years old. Most of the books in the library are thousands of years old. I have the first pictograph from the Neanderthals, recopied, of course, on paper. The stone tablets were too heavy to carry around. Our most prolific period was about 4,000 years ago. Interaction with Earth was active and rich. We had great mages on both sides writing treatises about the interactions, but about 3,000 years ago the number of patrons to visit us dropped. You are my first in, I'd say 150 of your years, if the time is right. So, should I cry or scream? I asked idly, as I turned to stare at the shelves. I am not sure, but I feel the same way, Shay said. He sounded old, and I glanced at him, but he looked fine, just tired. What is the primary language for the books presented here after the peak activity? Seatlali asked. Oh, that would be Greek, Sumerian, and Hebrew. They had such interesting stories, Cleo said with a smile. My favorite is still the Iliad. So much death. Those battles must have been glorious. How old are you? I asked. She sniffed a bit, as if affronted. I am 350, more than old enough to run the library myself. That wasn't what I was implying, I rushed to say. We are trying to find out about what the undoing was and why it happened. That was when magic and earth separated. Ah, my grandmother mentioned her great-grandmother had talked about that. Apparently, her older brother was upset he would not be able to laze around under the statue of him. She said he'd approved of the likeness and enjoyed the offerings. Cleo shook her head. If there is information in here, I would not know what it was under. I put my hands on my face and rubbed my temples. Do you mind if we walk around? And where is the display that was here the last time I was? You have never been in my library before, but if you mean the display hall, that is currently closed for rearrangement. It had been set up that way per the order of the council, and I am still working on trying to put it back to a proper layout. Cleo snarled that last part, obviously annoyed. However, the library is yours to peruse. Please do not take books out without checking them out. She nodded at us and went back to the main desk, humming something under her breath softly. Well, this was a waste of time, effort, and preparation. We didn't even have to fight anything. Shay muttered. Be glad of that, I countered. But let's wander. If something calls to us, maybe we can find a historian. Maybe there is a way to translate. I felt like doing 100 things at once. but instead I settled the backpack more firmly on my back. Then I headed into the stacks with Caroline padding behind me. I let my intuition just pull me through the stacks. There had to be an answer here, somewhere, but I didn't know what I was looking for. Mostly, I just wanted a few minutes without someone looking at me. The smell of dust and paper, wood and fur teased my nose. I just kept moving, my fingers not quite brushing across the volumes. Some were books, but many were scrolls or piles of paper, none of which I could read.
"Are you okay?"
Caroline's voice was soft as he pressed against my leg. I let my hand drop to scratch his forehead. Just frustrated. I thought we had found it, but in retrospect, why would there be anything in English here? It is a new language. If I went back 200 years, I doubt I could understand anyone. In 2000? It was stupid. But all the books I saw when I was here last time had English titles. Temptation, or... I carefully pulled out one of the books. Why they weren't crumbling when I looked at them, I attributed to magic. There was nothing written on the cover that I could see. I flipped it open. The third page was covered with marks and swirls and other lines. It meant nothing to me. I stared for a minute, hoping maybe something would change, but it remained unintelligible. No, this was all a waste of time and effort. Everyone is going to die, and I don't know what to do. Chapter 41. House of Esmere sues over premier magic books. In the news today, the House of Merlin is suing to allow all mages, regardless of level, access to the expensive books of magic. These books, printed in limited runs and not allowed in ebook form, are controlled by the OMO. Esmere is suing to have these books be treated like any other and available to the public. They are pushing for all magic reference books to be converted to ebooks so they are more widely available to mages. CNN Mage Focus. I sat at the kitchen counter the next morning, staring at my coffee. It felt like too much energy to even lift it. "Okay, Cori, talk." Jo slipped in next to me and bumped me with her shoulder. "You came in last night, barely said anything, and crawled into bed. So, spill?" "We found the library," I said, still staring at my coffee. "Well, that is excellent." Her voice then lost her excited note. "But I take it you didn't find the information you wanted?" A snort escaped me. For all I know, it could be there. English is a young language, like we aren't even 200 years old the way we speak and read. The youngest book there is over 2,000. I wanted to cry as I said that. It just seemed impossible. "Ah," Jo said softly, and put her arm around me. "Problems of the world seem a bit insurmountable today." I rested my head on her shoulder, too tired and depressed to pretend. They all think I can fix this. I'm willing to fix this, but I have no clue how to stop any of it. Jo squeezed me tight for a moment. "How about a perspective reset?" she asked. The way she said that, I knew I should be wary, but that didn't matter. If I couldn't trust her, there was no one left. Sure. What should I do? Jo laughed, lifted my head to kiss my forehead. "Get on decent clothes. You get to chaperone the kids today." She stepped out of reach as she said that, headed to the refrigerator. "Wait, what?" I asked. That had derailed my train of thought from the rips to the kids with enough speed to give me a headache. "I volunteered to be one of the parents for the zoo trip. Now you get to. It will help clear your mind, make sure you get back in touch with your family, and gives me the day to finish getting the house ready. I'm thinking we can move in at the end of January." Her smile was brilliant as she glanced back at me. "This month?" I double-checked. It was still January. "Yes, this month. Go enjoy a day with your delightful children, and I'll finish up the aspects that are easier done without kids underfoot." She was cooking as she talked, and the aroma of her staple breakfast burrito mixings filled the air. "What about work?"
I managed to sip my coffee, the dark richness hitting me and helping to lift my mood. I had already taken today off to chaperone, so I'll use it. Otherwise, I was going to try to get Mommy to watch them this weekend. I thought about it. Other than dinner time, I hadn't seen much of them. What with working on all the council stuff and everyone else being at the tutor house. Sure, why not? What do I need to know? If nothing else, the chaos involved in a bunch of pre-Ks at the zoo should distract me appropriately. Folder is with my purse. If you grab it, all the information should be in there. Taking another sip of coffee gave me the fortitude to rise and grab the folder. It sounded pretty easy. I was to manage the 4 to 6 kids they assigned me and follow the tours through the zoo. The kids would have money for snacks, and lunch had already been paid for. Sure, this gets me out of the house. I'll go change. I was still in my sleeping shorts and a tank top. Making coffee had been the height of my powers. Better get going. The kids will be down in about 5, given how hyped they were when they woke up. Joe grinned, and I groaned, but got going. I gave Caroline the offer to come, but he very firmly declined. He'd much rather sleep all day than deal with the many children. 3 hours later, we were at the Utica Zoo. I had a new appreciation for teachers and their ability to not hex every child in sight, especially when at least 2 teachers were magician level. It was for 2 classrooms, totaling 43 kids. Apparently, taking sympathy on me, I was only assigned 5 children, of which Jazz was one of them. She'd been ecstatic I was coming and had babbled the entire drive in. Maine had been happy, but he zoomed right over to Bobby and had stuck with him when groups were divvied up. Along with Jazz, I had 2 girls, Shalia and Adrian, and then 2 boys, John and Mark. At least everyone was wearing name badges. We would move through as a group and break at 11:45 for lunch. The teacher waved us in and we started with the barnyard animals, the neon yellow name badges making it obvious we were here as a group. Jazz instantly fell in love with the goats, and I couldn't blame her. No, we aren't getting any goats.
But Mama Cori, they're so cute.
Jazz whined a bit, looking up at me with luminous brown eyes. Yes, they are. Do you really think Caroline won't try to eat it? Or Azul and Vare? All of them would think you'd brought them a live snack, and that is not a habit I want to get into. Her mouth opened to argue, stopped, stared at the goat, then sighed. They'd eat it. Yep. Now let's catch up. By lunchtime, we'd made it all the way to the Scales and Tails reptile house. Jazz loved the zoo, but was bored by the reptile house. I guess snakes that just sat there were a bit boring compared to having your own dragon. We had to backtrack back to the Rotary Pavilion, where hot dogs, potato chips, and fruit had been provided. I talked to the other parents a little, but the questioning looks and probing questions weren't how I wanted to spend the day. That had me wandering over to look at the world's largest watering can and check in on Caroline. You enjoying yourself? I asked as I sipped on a soda. At least that I'd been able to purchase. The kids were stuck with milk, juice, and water.
Very much so. The sun coming through the window is just warm enough. The house is quiet, and I have a full stomach.
I snickered at that. If only my needs could be so easily met. Did you talk to your mother about the library?
Not yet. No, I did discover something new. I can go to the library now. It is visible and welcomes me almost. Though there is little there I can read, it is a comfortable space.
That caught me, and I stared at the watering can without really seeing it. You have a library card, I finally said as it clicked. You must go to the library the first time. After that, you have a card and can come and go as you please. It all made sense, but it still didn't help me with what I needed.
Ah.
He fell silent.
I think you are right. But in that case, I suppose I had better get moving.
He sounded like he was yawning as he spoke, a weird ripple in the mind speak. It mixed with the sounds of kids becoming more active. I'd have to get back in a minute.
To do? I swallowed the last of my soda and turned to the kids.
Do you really think my Malkin or Bainjarl would ever forgive me if I found this library and did not take them to it? Besides, they can research while they are there.
He sounded smug, and I laughed as I reached the picnic tables and started to help the kids clean up. Point, you do that. Maybe they can read some of the languages. I let him go and found my little group of kids. Our next stop was the Asian realm, as the wallaby enclosure was currently under construction. I found the cranes and the pigs uninteresting, but we were moving toward the lions, and that had everyone excited. A slash of pain slammed into my brain so hard that I cried out, brought to my knees. Jazz was at my side in a split second.
Mama Cori, what's wrong?
I forced myself to breathe as the pain lessened, and I stood slowly. The kids looked at me with horror. With a shaking hand, I wiped blood from my nostril, but I paid no attention to it. Instead, I turned, seeking the rip I'd felt form. Shit, I muttered as I found it, huge and gaping right over the lion enclosure. What was worse were the tentacles emerging from the gash. Chaos, I said with an odd sense of inevitability. Jazz, hold onto my belt loop, and the rest of you hold hands now. I snapped out the commands, taking over as I reached to close the rip. It didn't want to close. The bulging blackness had everyone's attention, and people were starting to scream and rush every which way, but I fought with trying to close it. Even the animals were upset, and you could hear shrieks and growls rumbling through the zoo. It didn't matter. I had to get it closed. Children, come over here now! A voice screamed. It sounded like one of the teachers, but I couldn't be sure. Don't move, I warned Jazz. I wasn't sure of anything else, but I could and would destroy the zoo to protect her. I fought not to turn and look for Maine, but I needed to focus on this. Outside the rip, the only thing I was aware of was Jazz's hand clenched on my belt and the heat of her body. The black ooze coming out was thick and heavy, not as bad as water, but it resisted and squirmed, pressing the sides as I tried to seal, ripping back open the tear. The tentacles were lashing out and wrapping around things, pulling them up. I had to move faster before a person was grabbed. You need to let her go, a woman yelled right in my ear. We have to get them to safety. She's safer here with me. In fact, all of them are. Now quit distracting me. I ground out as I fought. My hair was creeping away fast, and I'd be at nails, blood, and urine soon. Or I'd be bald.
Let me go!
Jazz screamed. It broke my concentration. A woman with her own badge was pulling at Jazz. All the other kids had been pulled away, and I could see them racing toward the reptile building. That isn't safe in there! I'm keeping her with me. Where is Maine? I spun, ignoring the rip that was getting larger. Maine!
Mama Cori, I'm here!
He wiggled out from the gaggle of kids and raced to me, arms clamping around my waist. They have to come! The woman screamed. Get down! I grabbed her and yanked as a tentacle came swinging toward us. It missed and went into the nearest animal enclosure. To my horror and astonishment, it came back up with an enraged lioness in its grip. The poor cat shredded the tentacle that held it and fell directly in front of us. Oh, shit. Caroline! I screamed the word in my mind as I vaporized a full inch of hair to slam a huge lightning bolt into the squirming blob trying to escape into our world. A shriek of outrage had it pulling back as I backed up, not wanting to kill the animal in front of me. Cori? Caroline said even as he appeared in front of me. One look at the lioness and he snarled. All the fur on his body poofed up. The woman behind me was screaming. The sound added an extra level of agitation to my already frazzled nerves. Knock it out or get it back in its pen. I have to get this closed, I ordered as I tried to pull enough power to close it. I needed blood. There was no time to try to cut myself, and I knew from experience that biting your own tongue, on purpose, hard enough to draw blood was more difficult than you might expect. I raked my uterus. Cramps hit hard enough that I wanted to double over crying, but I pushed them aside and used the power. Blood had always been Magic's favorite, and menstrual blood was even more powerful. I slammed another lightning bolt at it, splitting the electricity so it hit multiple places at once, and it screamed, pulling back. With a grunt, I sealed the rip, and my knees buckled. I staggered, the kids holding me up, and focused my eyes on the red blur. Caroline spun around the lioness, confusing her, and as she charged, he opened up a portal that she dove through, him following. A second later, another one opened in the enclosure, and the lioness rushed out. She had a few light scratches, probably love taps from Caroline, but nothing else. He stepped back out a second later and rushed to us. The teacher started screaming, "A monster! He's going to eat the kids!" I KO'd her. She crumpled to the ground, and the zoo went quiet. Or quieter. The animals were still making a ruckus, but even that seemed muted and less dramatic. Everyone in the area just stared at my little group. Jazz and Maine released me and rushed to Caroline, burying their heads in his fur as they wrapped arms around him. Not crying, but very close. I turned to see the woman I knocked out laying there. The other teacher and parents all staring at me, sheer terror in their eyes. I should have stayed in bed. Chapter 42. Panic at the zoo. The strange invasions are getting more dangerous every day. The recent attack at a zoo in New York has parents screaming. Already emergency meetings are being called and restrictions are being suggested to ensure people are being kept safe. The information that wild animals had gotten loose has been disproved, however, as all animals were accounted for in their enclosures. There were no confirmed injuries of children, though several parents needed to be treated for anxiety attacks. Merlin Cori Munroe was present, but no one has been able to validate what her level of involvement was, and the authorities are not providing any information. CNN Mage Focus. The aftermath of the zoo didn't surprise me, but did result in the school declaring I was never allowed as a chaperone again. The zoo gave us a lifetime membership for rescuing and not killing their lion. They apparently had no doubt Caroline could have done that easily. The various government agencies were called, reports taken, witness statements collected, questioning, and on and on and on. The whole time the kids would not leave my side. Caroline snarled and hissed at anyone who came too close, and the cops had no idea how to record the incident. Eventually, Alexan showed up, took over, and got me released, though with a "I'll talk to you later" glare that was unmistakable. By that time, Joe showed up, loaded us all up in the van, and took us home. I didn't talk the whole way home. I was numb and didn't know how to feel or what I should express. When we got home, the kids urged me out of the car and up the stairs into the sitting room. I curled up there, Caroline at my feet, still trying to figure out everything. Joe brought me a coffee, and I took a drink, almost choking from the amount of coffee liqueur in it, but it did help get me to unwind. "Are you okay?" Joe asked. She was crouched across from me, one hand on Caroline. "Yeah, tired. Mostly I'm trying to figure various things out." "So, tell me," she requested, and sank down. The kids had shaken off most of their terror and had gone to get their quetzos. The faint sound of them telling the mini dragons everything that had happened filtered down the stairs. Why there? Why now? This world has 7 billion people on it, and last check, we were getting 15 to 30 rips a day across the globe. Now these are the ones that are reported, so let's triple that and say it's 100 a day. For that matter, assume there are still more happening in the water and in places with no humans, and multiply that by 100. That is 10,000.
still a drop in the bucket for the number of places and people in the world. Why would a major rip happen above me? Jo settled herself, dark eyes on me. Charles didn't mention large amounts of magic users, and no magic users affect the appearance, she offered. He did, but that leads me to a few other possibilities that don't make me happy. It implies that my presence with a few other mages is such a draw that magic can't resist. I have no idea how many mages were at the zoo that day, either guests or employees. All the kids were too young to be emerging. So if my presence there and some other unknown aspect drew the rip, it means just being in public with me increases the chances of a rip exponentially. I looked up at her, my eyes bleak. It means I'm a danger to everyone, especially my family. Jo took a deep breath, but didn't look away. What else? With her question, I finally addressed the real problem, the one that had my rage wrapped into a source of incandescent power, where it took all my concentration to keep from exploding again. I have asked for help. I have been told it is my job to resolve it. I have tried. I have looked. I don't know how. And because I cannot get the help I need, the information I need, my children were put at risk. Everyone in that zoo was put at risk, but my children could have been killed. I swallowed and forced myself to relax. The anger didn't fade. I just locked it down hard and tight so that it didn't slip out of my control. I'm aware that people have died, and I care. But my children, your children, the two beings I helped create were almost killed. I closed my eyes for a long moment, then looked at Jo. I'm not sure the world would have survived if they had. Jo started to laugh. It was a giggle, then a snort, then a full-out laugh that had her on the floor, holding her stomach. I just stared at her, confused. When she could breathe again, she pushed herself back up and looked at me with a grin still on her face. Welcome to parenthood, Cori. That is what every parent feels the first time their children are endangered. Did you ever take the mage statistics class? I looked at her, unsure where this was going. I took research and statistics, but not that one. You're saying this is a common occurrence? No, I'm saying the number of child molesters that have died and parents that have used magic to kill their child's attacker is through the roof. More children are left with relatives because of their parents killing their attackers than through accidental deaths. And the number of parents that flee the country to a place that doesn't have as harsh penalties for those sorts of murders or attacks is sky high. I'm saying Sable and I would do the same thing for them. She stopped and looked me right in the eye. And for you and Caroline, you do anything to protect family, Cori. We know that. We've always known that. I broke down. The fear that had been wrapped around me snapped, and I started crying. Jo surged up from the floor and wrapped her arms around me. The kids stopped and in seconds were racing down the stairs, the Quetzos clinging to them, tails and wings streaming behind them. Jazz climbed into my lap while Maine curled up on top of Caroline to hold my legs. Don't cry, Mama Cori, Jazz ordered. You saved us. You were awesome. Teachers were dumb. Jazz, Jo warned. Even through my tears, I could see Jazz's bottom lip stick out. They were dumb. It's not calling names if they are. Jo had pulled away, and I could see her face. Her lips were pressed together, holding back a smile. Was all she said. Jazz squeezed me harder. You and Caroline were heroes. I want to be like you when I get bigger. I just held her tighter and fought to get my tears under control. The idea of not having them here felt like someone threatened to rip out my heart. I wouldn't allow that to happen. Instead, I kissed the top of her head and blew a kiss to Maine, who caught it and slapped it on his cheek. We stayed cuddled like that for at least 5 minutes before the kids began to squirm.
You gonna be okay, Mama Cori?
Maine asked hesitantly. Yes, Maine. Go, I'll be fine. He wiggled away from my legs, and Caroline, while Jazz squeezed me extra hard. You go, Jazz. I'll be fine. I need to do boring grown-up stuff. She gave me a look that I'd seen in Joe's eyes so often, showing she wasn't sure she believed me, but she finally let go and scampered off to the upstairs with Maine. You sound better, Joe said. She still sat next to me on the couch. Not sure I feel better, but this is ending now. It has to. The risks are way too great, and I can't let my presence endanger you, Sable, the kids, Hamadia, and her daughters. I just can't. I'm done playing nice. If I have to pluck that Merlin-blasted bird, I will.
Excellent. I bet Phoenix tastes like chicken.
I blinked. Then Joe and I fell into helpless giggles. There wasn't much else we could do to a statement like that. The worst part was I couldn't really disagree with his comment. I went in and washed my face, flinching away from the hack job on my hair. It looked like I'd let the kids attack it with scissors, leaving it mostly above my shoulders, with sections shorter and longer. If I was lucky, my magic use in the near future wouldn't be under pressure, and I could choose where the offerings came from to neaten it up. Or I could chop it off and keep it with me to use. I sighed and moved to my study, pulling Caroline with me. Are you okay? In all the drama, I'd forgotten to check on him. But I also knew he was pretty good at telling me when he was hurt.
I was not hurt. The lion was amusing, though too slow and stupid for real entertainment. Even the Quetzos will be smarter and more of a challenge.
He jumped up on the window seat to clean his claws.
Not even the blood tastes good. Too tame.
I gave him a narrow-eyed look, but let it be. My Cath would never change. Did you get a chance to take Esmere and Bainjarl to the library?
No. I was moving slow, and I figured I still had hours. Then you called.
I nodded, biting my lip. Let's see if I can offer them library access in exchange for information.
Malkin would give you much because of me. She rather enjoys your definition of family.
He had stopped grooming to look up at me, his green eyes bright. I know, but this I think I want to pay for, as I'm going to ruffle a lot of feathers.
Very well. I will let you do that.
He settled back down, but I could swear I heard a note of approval in his tone. Setting up a 3-way mind speak took me a minute. Most of the time, if they were near me, I could just broadcast. This involved calling each of them and joining the calls, so to speak. When they had both answered, I started right in. Bainjarl, Esmere, I would like to trade for some information or assistance. I wasn't asking favors this time. I was trading for it. I could hear the stunned shock in their silence, but I just waited. The memory of Jazz and Maine holding onto me was more than enough to keep me on my course. I see, Herald Munroe. What is it you would like to trade for? Esmere asked slowly. I want the information on how to call a council meeting myself, and what the rules are for council proceedings, and for both of you to serve as my advisors for all future council meetings, even if you need to quit being a lord. At no point had I been told anything, and they didn't tend to provide info if you didn't ask it. I knew this would cut deep, but I'd rather have Esmere quit being a lord than risk us being on opposite sides. This wasn't something I could offer Tursane. I just knew that somehow. But Esmere wasn't primary. Bob was.
And what are you trading for this?
Baneural asked warily. I couldn't blame him, as this was asking a lot. You will be brought to the Library of Magic, where you can request permanent access to use it. I stated, and this time I had the feeling they wouldn't forget. After all, I had a library card. If I had slapped them across the face with a live fish, I think they would have been less shocked.
You found it?
Esmere hissed.
It has books?
More books than I can count, and most I can't read. But it has wonders that I can't even begin to explain or show you. But I'm sure the librarian can.
There's a librarian?
Baneural sounded more excited than I'd heard in a decade.
There is someone to help find things?
Yes. I didn't bother to keep the smugness out of my voice. Her name is Cleo, and she is a sphinx. If a feather had fallen, you would have heard it hit the ground in the resounding silence.
They still exist.
Baneural's voice was almost a whisper. I guess. I mean, I talked to her and got a library card. I was unaware they were not supposed to exist. That part did surprise me. Caroline hadn't been astonished by her existence, but then he was a Cath. He rarely showed any reactions that weren't aggressive or posturing.
I will agree. I have no council oaths that I need to worry about. I never dreamed it still existed.
Baneural's voice was all but reverent. I couldn't remember any other denizen ever sounding reverent about something. Esmere? I asked softly.
The offer is fair. I'm torn. With the storm approaching, I will not be able to remain neutral, but I fought hard for my right to be a lord. Also, while I can read, it is not something I excel at as Baneural does. But there is history there, and other ways of doing magic. What was common prior to the undoing? It is information that gives me leverage and favors to trade to anyone.
Her voice sounded very thoughtful. I must warn you, many of the books are written in languages that aren't even spoken on Earth anymore. None are in English.
So, the librarian can translate it into any language for you.
What? The word came out of my mouth and mind at the same time. I could feel the shock of the two denizens. She can do that?
Of course,
Baneural said.
It is the magic of librarians. What good would it do to have a library where no one can read what you have?
Why didn't she tell us? Why didn't you tell us? I glared at Caroline for that. He licked his paw, but his tail thrashed.
I was unaware,
he muttered.
Did you ask?
Esmere sounded curious. It never occurred to us. We just asked for things in English, and there really weren't any. I took a deep breath and pushed that away. I needed to share that, but it didn't change what needed to be done now. What is your decision, Lord Esmere? Chapter 43. Looking for 3 mages for a research project. Must be passionate about history and the origins of magic. Experience with the syntax of other languages, especially Babylonian, Greek, and Hebrew. Willing to do all research on site. Must be willing to sign an NDA that will be strongly enforced. Contact Shay for more information. House of Emrys message board. It took me 2 days, mainly because I wanted to make sure my family was safe and Shay and Sitlali knew what I was going to do. But I didn't discuss it with them. I just let them know. Joe and Sable got the kids moved over to the Tudor house so that I didn't need to worry about them being in the house if there was some sort of retaliation. Marisol and the Guzmans were warned, and I took the time to call Chris and get him up to speed. He wanted to come help, but I wanted him way out of the danger zone. Then I warned Hamadia.
What do you mean? You want to know if I can survive if the house is destroyed?
There was a note of panic in her voice. I need to know if I need to get out of the house. I stated the words as if I was going to the store. But to be honest, I had no idea where to go if I couldn't be here. A hotel would be worse. I supposed I could go camping somewhere, but that didn't sound fun at all. I'd have to buy an RV. I shook my head to get my thoughts under control. If a rip happens here and I can't stop it and the house gets hurt, will you be okay? Her entire body had shut down, turning a dark brown gray. There were no flowers or green leaves on her body.
Cori, are you saying you are worried that an attack might damage my tree?
For once, she wasn't floating on the tips of her toes, but instead both feet were flat on the ground, as if she was sinking her toes into the wood to reach the ground. Yes, basically, that is what I am asking. She closed her eyes, swaying a bit back and forth.
If my roots are not destroyed, I will be fine. But this house is part of my realm. Short of you calling fire here and feeding it, I do not know how I would easily sustain more than minor damage. I can control who comes in here and expel anyone that does not belong. Your presence has made me stronger than I was at the beginning.
Even chaos beings from a rip? I pressed the issue, needing to make sure she understood.
Even so, my realm is order. This is my realm as much as the glade is. As long as you do not hurt me, I am difficult to mortally wound,
she said finally, as if she'd tried to figure out how to say it. But it made sense in an odd way. You could prune trees, burn them, and often they came back stronger and healthier than before. Good. I almost sagged with relief. I'm going up against the council, and I wanted to make sure you wouldn't be hurt.
Should I remove access for those who visit?
I shook my head. No, or at least not yet. I am working on the idea that they are all still my friends, just we are having a difference of opinion on how to proceed. But thank you for the offer. I moved over and hugged her tightly. She returned the gesture. By the time I stepped back, green had returned to her bark, and leaves were starting to burst out of her hair.
Very well. I shall return to my sister daughters. I am surprised. They are growing very fast and with more essence than I've ever heard of. I had figured years or decades before they awoke. Now I am thinking it might be closer to months. Your family is very good to mine.
Madia, you are family. Don't ever think you aren't. We love you too. The flush of flowers that burst over her cheeks made me want to laugh in delight, but I kept it tamped down. She just nodded, rose up on her toes, and spun away. I let out a long breath. Everyone was waiting for me and my next move. I moved to the study and curled up in my favorite chair. I sat in the house I'd come to love and just breathed. For the first time, I sank into myself and felt my magic. Over the years, I'd come to enjoy it, but I'd always treated it as an unwelcome part of me, something I had to deal with, much like my menstrual cycle. It was part of me, but I'd always had a vague resentment at the problems it had caused. Granted, it had brought me Carolian and made my life rich, much like my cycle let me have 2 of the best kids in the world. It didn't mean there wasn't a part of me that didn't still resent it, and the fact that my magic had cost me Stevie. It was time to let that go. I closed my eyes and reached for magic. We tried so hard as humans to quantify everything, put it into boxes for easy explanations. In some ways, it worked. Understanding the science made magic so much easier to do, though the entry gate was harder. But we never figured out why we could manipulate the forces of the universe. So I looked. It was like sensing the air I breathed. There, yet not tangible. Magic was part of me, and I was part of it. I felt it as a part of who I was,
and knew it had made me who I was as much as my parents and friends. It was time to stop resenting what was in essence me. I let my resentment go and accepted that I was a mage and the Herald of Magic. Meditation had never been anything I enjoyed. Too much sitting quietly, and I got bored. But this time, seeking inside and outside myself, I found a sense of wholeness I'd never had. By the time I opened my eyes, I felt more at peace than I'd felt in my life. Carolean was sitting across from me, positioned so when I opened my eyes, he would be the first thing I saw. He tilted his head, green eyes slowly blinking at me, then nodded. I think I'm ready, at least mentally. Let me change. Once again, I dressed for war. I put cut-off offerings in my pocket, braids, nail clippings, the true power of a Merlin with a familiar. It basically gave me an extra source of offerings that most didn't have. I had no idea if denizens could do this, and I didn't care, but I was ready to spend them all to get my way. Cargo pants, this time with a very sharp knife if I needed more, though Carolean had gleefully offered to bite me. A tank top, overshirt, light jacket, and boots. My backpack loaded again to the brim. Better safe than sorry, as far as I was concerned. I checked my hair. It was barely at chin level with the closures lately. It would make me look weaker than I was. Good. The harness with its accoutrements was stuffed in my bag as well. I knew he wouldn't want to wear it to the council chambers, but I felt better with it, as I never knew where life would take me. You ready? I asked Carolean.
Yes, I will take you there, then go get Shay. Cassis will bring Lali as soon as I tell her you are there.
He rose with a long stretch.
The battle will be glorious.
I leaned down and kissed the top of his head. I suspect it will. It wasn't something I could argue. The odds of this not being a fight were slim to none. Let's go. A splash of pain, and we stepped into the council chambers. Carolean disappeared almost immediately. I stayed in the shadows, looking at it. I'd never seen it empty before. The chambers should have been pale and lifeless, being simple gray stone with rings of lighter gray, one wall destroyed to open to a courtyard. But it wasn't. The place rang of quiet majesty and power. The weight of ages had settled into the bones of the building. I realized I'd never seen it from the outside or even gone past this room. For all I knew, this was all that existed. The rest might not. Or maybe this was the fabled Camelot brought here by Merlin himself. My ruminating was cut off by twin spikes of pain, as Cassis, bringing Lali, appeared, and Carolean with Shay, and to my surprise, Scott Randolph and Dolly. Guests? I asked, glancing at Scott. Not that I wasn't glad to see him. His training and experience as a rogue mage hunter meant he was better with offensive uses of his magic than I ever would be. Shay shrugged.
He was around, and I figured everyone else gets their own cheering section. Why not us?
Hello, Scott. It's good to see you. I assume Shay brought you up to speed. Scott gave me a roguish grin. He was now in his late 60s, but I could tell he must have been a charmer back in his prime.
Yep, should be fine. With Dolly here, I'm not worried about anyone attacking me from behind.
I protect!
Dolly barked with enthusiasm. I had to fight my chuckles as Carolean and Cassis both managed to sneer at the dog and instantly find something that needed to be groomed. As far as I could tell, it was a mix of cold shoulder and giving someone the bird. It never failed to make me smirk. Yes, you do, Dolly, I said as she came over to get pets. I introduced Lali, who also gave pets, much to Dolly's excitement from the number of times my legs got whacked with her tail. But the laughter and joy faded. Are we ready for this? Lali shrugged, as did Shay.
Are we sure going back and reading the books isn't the answer?
I wanted to be sure. I'd shared with them what Esmere had said, but we all agreed until we knew what we were looking for, it did us no good.
Troy was only discovered because there were clues that led to it. If all there had been was the tale of the battle, we wouldn't have found it. We need more than just the undoing.
Shay said calmly. He was dressed today in jeans, a t-shirt, and a jacket. It was the most informal thing I'd seen him in for a council meeting. Scott had copied it, though with his jean jacket with BAM on the back. He still exuded an air of danger Shay never would. I nodded. What he said was correct. Once we had more information, maybe the library would be useful. Bane Jarl, are you ready? I sent that, and then sent to Esmere the same. A minute later, there were two beings walking toward me. Bane Jarl was dressed for battle. Literally. He had a chest plate on that protected his breastbone. The edges of his wings reflected silver, and there was a metal cap on his beak that gleamed with danger. Esmere, for her part, seemed excited for the coming actions. Her eyes were wide and dilated, and her tail twitched, even as she tried to restrain it. Across her chest and back, she wore a modified leather breastplate. It looked like a mix between what horses would wear to battle when there were still knights, and the harness Kirlian wore. Are you sure? I asked her. Bane Jarl had less to lose, and for the most part was agreeing to be my counselor. Esmere thought she would lose what she'd fought for. I am comfortable with my choices. There is much you are unaware of regarding the machinations in the council. I risk less than you might think. She sat and looked at me, so I shrugged. Very well. Esmere, in exchange for advising me and backing me up in council, I will take you to the Library of Magic, assuming I survive. If not, the others have agreed to fulfill my debt. Esmere flashed amber eyes at the others, and they all nodded their assent. I agree. She turned and paced to the center of the ring. Stand here. She tapped a claw in the center, and I looked down. It hadn't been visible in the gloom of the chamber, but where bricks usually perched was a silvery stone with all the symbols etched on it in a triangle. If you weren't looking for it, it was all but invisible. I moved to stand where she indicated. Call a magic. All lords have the right to call a meeting. Pull the magic into you, then down into the stone and repeat what I told you. I did as she instructed. Magic flooded in at my request, and much like with the library form, I pushed it out, then said in a loud, clear voice, I, Earth Lord Cori Munroe, call an emergency council meeting by the office and oath I took. It will start in 1 hour. Magic grabbed it, and like an explosion, I felt the magic race away from the center, rippling out everywhere. That was interesting. Why don't we feel it? Esmere flicked a tail. You do not live in the realms. All those sworn to the council will feel it, not others. I nodded, processing that, and stared at the gray circle. It was done. Now to deal with bricks. Chapter 44. A new alert system is being rolled out today. After working with major telecommunication companies, the government has arranged for the number 988 to route to a RIP hotline. If you see a RIP, regardless of the size or area, call 988. They will ask you to provide your location. The nearest mages will be dispatched to deal with it. Please do not enter the RIP, nor interact with any creature or thing that might emerge. Many are deadly to humans, and they are not easily subdued. Public announcement. With assurance I didn't feel, I moved back to the area for Earthrealm lords.
The chairs were still there, which vaguely surprised me, but I didn't worry about it. I settled in and reminded myself once more of how lucky they were that my kids had not been hurt. This council might not still be standing if they had been. Shay was sitting in his chair, while Citlali appeared to hold court from her sword chair. She had a poise that said, "Kneel if you wish to speak to me." It was amusing. Beings began to appear, all of them glancing at me, but no one dared to walk over until Tersane appeared. She stood there for a long time, then slithered over to me. She positioned herself so she could see the majority of the council chamber, but still talked to me.
"A few questions, if I may, Cori."
She sounded hesitant. I would have to fix this. I didn't want my friendship with Tersane to be damaged. "Of course, please feel free." I smiled at her, but I doubted it was reflected in my eyes. I was still too angry, even though days had passed.
"Did you come by a few days ago? My nest swears you did, but surely you would have spoken with me."
There was worry and a bit of a hurt note in her voice, and I silently cursed. Once I had spoken of the library, both Esmere and Bainral had remembered. Hopefully Tersane would, once I told her. "Yes, we were there." I pulled my wallet out of its normal pocket. The library card all but jumped into my hand. "I would be delighted to show you the library so you can get your card. For some future favors?" Not 2 months ago, I would have just taken her, but now I couldn't afford to give up such a powerful trading option. She stared at the card, all her snakes coming around to stare in apparent wonder as well.
"You found it?"
There was a hushed reverence in her voice. "Yes, and got cards. Assuming I live through this, are you interested in a trade?" The hunger in her eyes was almost physical.
"Yes,"
she managed, then cleared her throat.
"That would be something worth much. Maybe more than I can pay, but we will discuss later."
She glanced around, and a large portion of the council were showing up with their various entourages.
"Did you happen to invite anyone else to your council meeting?"
That threw me. At no point had Esmere mentioned inviting anyone. Like?
"Smog is not a council member, but she wants to stay in the loop. Same for a few others. It might behoove you to invite them."
Her tone was mild as she rotated.
"Basically, anyone you think I might want to eat popcorn with."
"Oh." I felt like slapping my head and instantly sent out a note to Jorgas, Smog, the Thunderbird, and Tietang. I doubted 2 of them would attend, but you never could tell. "Thank you," I said sincerely. Tersane bobbed a bit in acknowledgement. She flicked her eyes over to Bainral, who stood there dressed, but completely at ease as he and Citlali chatted, her in low tones.
"Support?"
"And then some. I have multiple options in play." The small part of me that wanted to be 10 again and internally a child wailed at how manipulative I'd become. The rest of me just smiled at figuring out how to play their game. Tersane gave me one last smile, then turned to head back to her ring.
"One thing, Cori."
She paused as she talked, not looking back at me, but fixated on the dragon's courtyard.
"How bad is it going to be?"
"Somewhere between West Side Story and Rocky." My voice was flat, but I figured that about covered the range.
"Oh, you do plan on singing and dancing as well?"
Her voice had an amused tone to it. "Not currently, but you never know what might happen, though my singing voice is nothing impressive."
"I see. Then let's hope your opponent is not as prepared as you seem to be."
"We can but hope." My voice was flat as she slid away, but I was glad the library seemed not to be as big of an issue this time. Shay leaned forward. "They are showing up and all staring at us. You ready?" I laughed. "No, but this can't go on any longer, and the only way to stop it is to force Bricks to answer. If anyone else knows, they aren't talking, and I am reluctant to engage in wholesale slaughter. My voice was dark as I gazed out at the beings moving in and out, more and more arriving as the word spread.
Reluctant? Not opposed?
Citlali asked, her voice quiet. I didn't look at them. I received enough guilt looking in my mirror. If you'd asked me at 19, I'd have died before hurting anyone. When the draft started, I would have bent over backward to avoid causing insult. Even now, the last thing I wanted was to be in the halls of power. It isn't my jam. I stopped and looked at them, a cold smile on my face. I kept trying to ignore all this and see if a solution would pop up. But Brix put my children at risk. Children that I never thought I'd love more than I could breathe. I will burn their world down to get the answers I need to protect my family. Both of them were quiet for a long time, and Caroline had moved over to me, his chin on my leg.
And how would you live with that afterward?
Kessis asked from under the sword throne. And what makes you think I would? I didn't know how else to answer that other than I had zero desire to live as the type of person I would become. Another reason to get this fixed as soon as possible. Citlali said quietly. Shay just looked old, and his eyes, when he looked at me, had more understanding than I would have expected. But it was Scott that surprised me. He gave me a bittersweet smile and nodded. It rather surprised me he had never married. From everything I could see, he would have made a good spouse. The conversation might have continued, but a flash of flame signified Brix's arrival. The phoenix glared at me. At this point, I just felt annoyed. If phoenixes could kill with their eyes, I'd already be dead. Since it didn't seem to be a power they had, the excessive glaring was annoying. I checked my watch, and there were still 10 minutes left. Banjarl, do you have to wait in the visitors area, or can you stay here? His feathers ruffled as he responded.
As I'm your official advisor, and Shay has declared Scott Randolph to be his, we both may stay in your circle, but we must stay here. We can talk to you or respond for you if you direct us, but we can't argue or leave unless you direct us.
He tilted his head toward Scott.
It is a little used clause in the structure of the council, as most councillors have little desire to have anyone else provide input into their actions.
I rolled my eyes. For a group with little real-world influence, I don't understand why anyone would care. The griffin almost choked, and I got alarmed that I might need to figure out how the Heimlich maneuver worked on a bird-lion hybrid body as he struggled to breathe.
You really don't understand, do you?
I could see others looking at him with the same expression I had. I thought I did. They get to help control what happens and have input in what the realms do. Not that I figured out how that works. Most realm denizens I've met seem pretty independent. Banjarl snorted.
And you think most of us would do anything for that? No. By being a counselor, you get magic dedicated to you and your pocket realms. You don't have to expend your own energy to keep it up. It is part of the oath that being a counselor gives you that bit of power, to the point that other beings can live in your realms knowing that you will keep it steady, safe.
Everything clicked into place with that. That is why Esmere talks about our world not changing. They have to work to keep it static.
Yes, and Esmere is a very strong counselor. It lets her have the plains that let her children roam. It lets the animals they hunt have places to live, to thrive. She makes it attractive, keeps it stable, keeps the predator-prey levels in the right balance, and more. She's the only one I've ever seen to actually try to replicate an ecosystem. We don't have insects, and most magic pollinates plants. Plus, you get the rights to travel to all the realms. That is usually blocked.
You mean the creation of rips to other places? I pushed, double-checking.
Yes. Why do you think you aren't just overrun? They don't have the right to leave their realms or pockets.
He stared at us like we were juicy morsels, and he couldn't decide which one to eat first. What about the chaos creature that came through with the planewalker? I was royally confused now.
That was an exiting rip, or one magic created that let it through. That being didn't create it, just utilized it.
This all makes much more sense now, Shay said. But what do we get out of being counselors? Banyorl shrugged his wings.
What did you negotiate for?
We all stared at him, and I had the desire once again to beat my head against the stone. It was always what we didn't know that bit us in the ass. Wouldn't have the previous agreements with Earth carried over? Citlali asked. Cori, didn't you say we were represented when humans wore armor? I nodded, thinking back. Yeah, I assumed it was during the time of Merlin, either before or after. But didn't the Egyptians and Greeks have armor, swords, other weapons? Merlin, for all I know, the Babylonians did too. Citlali shrugged. We know humans used to be here, and they must have negotiated something, so that should still hold true. We looked at each other and sighed. Library of Magic.
That is the most likely place to find any information of that sort.
Banyorl agreed. My watch dinged. 2 minutes. Showtime, people. I redirected my attention to bricks in the center, and I would have sworn he was smoking around the edges, but at least he wasn't glaring at me. Now he seemed to let his gaze bounce from being to being. It didn't matter. This had to end now. My watch buzzed at the time indicated, and Bricks raised brilliant wings.
Council is now in session.
The words beat into my mind, and it felt extra cudgely today.
All non-counselors leave the floor.
Beans headed up to the gallery, but I did spy that Zmog and Onyx had shown up, though they looked like they were involved in their own discussion and ignoring the proceedings.
Earth, why have your visitors not left?
Brick snapped, the impact of those words making me cranky. Well, crankier. They are advisors, as defined in the Council Treaty. That was what Banyorl had advised me to say. It also meant I really needed to get a hold of the treaty and read it. Bricks huffed, but didn't continue. Now his entire focus was on me.
Lord Cori, why have you summoned a council meeting?
I rose, kind of impressed he didn't attack me for daring to, but the session was still young. I stepped into the ring and looked at him. I, both as Earth Lord and Herald of Magic, have called a council meeting to require you to share what you know of the undoing. The room went silent, and Bricks changed from a rainbow of bright, joyful hues to a cascade of colors that reminded me of sorrow. Chapter 45. The tears of a phoenix are wondrous things, though not all are the same. But when they cry from grief, those same tears are a poison that can destroy even dragons. Alchemist text. Brix's feathers fluffed up, and a sharp, harsh note slashed through me.
You dare summon a council for this?
Yes, you have information I need, and I will have it now. I don't care why you haven't freely shared. That is over. Tell me about the undoing.
Never.
The word hissed through my mind like a skate over ice.
You are the herald. You can figure this out. It is not my responsibility to do your job.
If the comment hadn't encompassed so much of my life, I might not have started laughing. I could feel the attention of everyone in the room on me, and I didn't care.
Are you laughing at me?
I didn't know if the tone of voice implied outrage or disbelief. Either way, I didn't care. Not really. More the comment. I managed, fighting back my chuckles. You said this is what I was, not me. So you could be seen as my employer, and I'm telling you that I don't have the information I need to do this. So you are going to tell me, or I'll say, fuck off, and let the consequences fall where they may. I figure a few atomic bombs will solve the problem of too much magic. My attitude was purely in the no fucks given stage, but the idea of that much death made my stomach threaten to empty on the floor. But if they gave me no chance? You dare threaten us? Bricks had puffed up and flames danced around the perch. It isn't a threat. It is a statement of fact. If the rips continue, Earth will retaliate. If you don't help me, I can't stop them. If they get worse, more people will die and Earth will retaliate faster. Bricks raised his wings, color flooding back into them, bright, harsh, and it felt like malicious joy. You all need to die. It is your fault the undoing happened. I will revel in your destruction. I have nothing to tell you. Council is Oh, no, you don't. I snapped out. You will tell me the history and cause of the undoing. This isn't a request. This is an order. My children were put in danger. That will never happen again. All humor had left my voice, and rage beat at my mind. There wasn't any calm logic left, just the deep, primal desire to make sure those I loved were safe. Good. The word was a slap in my face. I hope they die. I ask magic daily for all humans to watch their families die, screaming for help and assistance, just like mine. This is all your fault. You can pay in blood the way I did. The words rang through the council chambers, and the audible intakes of breath told me this wasn't something known or expected. The rage from the phoenix surprised me, but it didn't change a thing. I have no clue what happened, but either way, it was thousands of years ago. Are you going to blame me for what my ancestors did over 3 millennia ago? I will blame humans until their ashes lay at my feet and create a sea of glass from their tears. Magic should have eaten them long ago. You'll never find the information, and I couldn't be more delighted. Dismissed! Bricks launched into the air, wings flapping as magic surged for a sidestep. No! I bit out, hard and angry. I slammed the tunnel back into the chamber. You will tell me! A surprised squawk slipped out as Brix's wings beat rapidly to regain balance. You dare! Flames flew at my face, and I batted them away with air. My mind locked down into grabbing the truth from the blasted bird. I could do it, but while Brix was slinging magic at me and flying, I couldn't. I needed the phoenix down and exhausted to extract the information as easily as possible. I struck out with a KO, but the beam was too narrow, and Brix flew up to avoid it. The air around me dropped to freezing temperatures, and I narrowed my eyes. This was the reason I'd worn warm clothes. Because Brix used fire. I assumed the phoenix was chaos, but it could have been a natural ability. This solidified it. It kind of matched his personality. Fire could change the temperature, either pulling it in or out. In a fight, it could be deadly, but the right clothes helped. I countered by pulling moisture from the air and soaking him with it, but the amount available streamed off as fast as I could add it. You disgust me. Why magic ever graced you, I'll never understand. But if you die, then humans are dead. That would be excellent. Brick swooped up, and I got ready to block a sidestep, but instead I blinked, confused. I turned to watch the feathers train behind the bird as I tried to remember.
Cori, stop him!
Carolene's words cleared the confusion in my mind, and I realized disrupt thought had been used on me. 2 could play at that game. I hit out with a disrupt, then followed up with illusion. creating a wall right in front of Brix's beak, a squawk and a flurry of wings as Brix flew out of the way. Muttering started in the chamber, and there were arguments on both sides, but I only caught words as I tried to beat the blasted bird down without a fatal injury. I couldn't pull information from something dead.
Stop her! This is a disgrace.
Brix should have supplied the information. I was at least slightly cheered that a few were on my side, but I couldn't focus on that. Instead, I threw Murphy at him and Lady Luck at me. Then I started casting lightning bolts. I tried to keep them at less than a taser, but it was hard. The furor doubled as more than one missed the darting bird and hit the walls.
Oh, nice hit. Fried the annoying feather duster.
That voice I recognized, and I tried not to laugh. Instead, I darted to the other side of the ring as Brix dove directly at me, talons outstretched. I had zero doubt those razor-sharp feet would do massive damage to me.
Stop her! This is challenging our chair.
Jerk. I was getting annoyed, and I cheated. I had water in my tumbler. I made it evaporate. Then I soaked the air around the flying form, hard and fast, forcing the bird down. Brix tumbled, and I turned the water to ice, freezing feathers and feet to the floor. Winded, I stalked over, crouching next to him. You will talk, or I will rip every feather from you. As proof, I wasn't kidding, though mostly I wanted the information in the forefront of the phoenix's mind. I grabbed a primary wing feather and yanked. Brix shattered the air with a screech of outrage as it popped out. Tell me exactly how the undoing happened. I paused, and then a mix of guilt and curiosity forced me to continue. And what happened to your family?
This is unacceptable,
Charissa shouted.
This is an attack on a council member, and we are supporting it?
I sighed, but Brix had been beaten, and I kept the cold up. Every time Brix's magic tried to melt the ice, I pulled the heat away. It meant I was sweating as I pulled the heat away, but I'd deal with it.
Cori Munroe has the right to demand answers.
Baynarl's voice rang through my head, and I assumed everyone else's.
When Brix tried to flee from dismissing the council and refusing her rightful request, Brix abandoned the duty of the office. That means it became a fight for chair, not an attack. And written in the bylaws, if the current chair attacks first, blocking a sidestep is not an attack. The defender has every right to fight back.
Another wave of murmurs. I just want the information. I directed this comment to the room at large, then Brix. Tell us, or I'll pull it from your mind.
If it was a challenge, this Cori Munroe is now eligible for the chair,
a voice said. I thought it might be the Alarez, but I wasn't sure. She would make a better one than Brix, Zmog put in. Shush, dragon. You refused a seat. You have no input in this, Frey snapped out. I wanted to turn to see expressions and body language, but I didn't dare move my focus from the bird. It seems to me there is an easier option, one we should have tried before, Tersane said, her voice mild. The fact that most other voices silenced gave proof either to her power in the chamber or just her power. I had no idea which it was. Most likely both. And that would be... Esmere purred. I wanted to roll my eyes. This whole setup seemed prearranged. But then what did I know? Everyone kept telling me this was where deals were made. I just didn't know what to deal for. Except this. I needed this.
If the council as a whole demands Brix share this information,
Tersane said, her voice ice cold. I grabbed 2 handfuls of feathers tight in my hand and swiveled to look at her. What? That was an option? Why didn't we do that before? Tersane smiled. Not her I'm going to turn you to stone smile, but the one that implied you would taste good for dinner.
because all counselors must agree, and there were some that refused to vote that way.
Huh. That didn't surprise me, and to be honest, I didn't want to know who didn't want to tell me. Sometimes ignorance was bliss. I call a vote for all counselors. Shay's voice rang out. I turned my attention back to the bird and froze the water again. Brix's colors were muted and exhaustion all but coated the phoenix. I call to vote that Brix, former chair of the council, be required to share the information regarding the undoing. There was an odd power to his voice, and I figured Bainjarl was coaching him. Who is for this measure? I came from many throats and minds, but I had no way to tell who might not have been in there. And against? I waited, ready to start yanking feathers and memories out of the bird's mind. But no one spoke. Then it is passed. Brix shall relay all that is known regarding the undoing and the loss of family. Shay said clearly, and I felt magic sweep around me and sink into Brix. Whereas not a minute before there had been defiance and resentment, muscles ready to launch up in the air the second there was an opening. Now, Brix sagged to the ground, defeated. Will you tell? I asked, hands still wrapped around feathers. I have no choice, Brix responded, the anger mostly leached from the words. Nodding, I released the feathers and rose, stretching for a moment as I allowed the ice to melt. Brix shook out wet feathers, and heat washed over them, drying the feathers back to their normal colors. Wings flapped, and I readied myself to stop and attempt to flee. But instead, Brix settled on the perch in the center. Had that been there all along? I couldn't remember, but for now it didn't matter. What mattered was the information Brix had hidden from me, from everyone. I waffled for a minute, then moved back to my chair, only taking my eyes off Brix for a moment. My trust level was still non-existent. Brix flapped on the perch a few times and preened. I almost said something, but I heard an upswing in voices above us.
Patience. Word is out. Beings are coming.
Bainjarl whispered in my mind. Instead, I pulled out a granola bar and unwrapped it, waiting for story time. It felt like forever, but my watch assured me it was less than 5 minutes when Brix faced me, ignoring the others.
I am 7,000 years old. I have returned the egg 4 times. I never forgot the loss that led to my first ashing.
Chapter 46. Stories of Atlantis have abounded as long as we have written stories, but no evidence has been found. At this point, Atlantis is assumed to be the literal interpretations of the dreams for a utopia, this desire for a perfect civilization that exists at a primal level for humanity. But while there may have been a city or a country that had some aspects of this advanced civilization, we know it never actually existed except in dreams. History of Magic. Brix's voice filled the room, and once the venom faded from the voice in my mind, it caught you up in the sway of words.
My world was vast. Plains and mountains, colors that have since faded, graced the trees and the flowers. The world smelled of joy and life. All around was magic. The unicorns ran with the hides. Their white coats shimmered in the moonlight, while dragons lived in high mountains, frolicking in the snow. There were these strange creatures on 2 legs that were weak and silly, but some found them good eating.
I was lost in the words, and I had to fight to not lean forward enraptured.
I cared little about any of that then. I had the world to explore. I soared in the clouds, crossed the oceans, to the heights of mountains, the bottoms of valleys. I slept in trees long gone extinct, flitted in and out of the realms as the doors were there open to any who knew them. Time had no meaning to me. Then there was only life and the joy of every sunrise.
Bricks lifted wings, displaying the colorful feathers, and sang a low, slow note that felt like a good stretch. The sun rose and fell, and slowly those strange 2 legs built silly things. I remember watching a big triangle being built in the land of milk and honey, towers that scraped the sky. They rerouted rivers, created lakes, and killed each other. Some magical beings interacted with them. Some were treated as gods. But most of us regarded them as either amusing, boring, or edible. I saw them as passing fancy and followed the sun, watching the world change. The scope of time he spoke about was almost impossible for me to imagine, yet his words pulled us in. Part of me knew I should sit back and figure out which magic was being used, but I needed to hear this story. My kind is rare, and in the beginning we were magic created. I was the only one, but I knew not loneliness, for I had the world. But one day, I heard a song. It twisted through my heart and soul, and I knew there was another out there. Day and night I flew, following the song on the breadth of my wing, around clouds, through showers, and into the light of the moon. I found my Shira. You know of my colors, all of them, the image of rainbows shattered across the surface of a placid lake. Shira was the moon, silver and white, with touches of rainbows when she moved. Her feathers were almost radiant with magic, and her song could craft stone. Then there were her eyes. They were the sun itself, luminous with gold and flecks of green that made the trees turn orange in shame. The joy in his voice as he talked about Shira made me ache. I knew love, but what he put into his words made my love for Joe and Caroline seem almost shallow in comparison. She matched me wing for wing, song for song, joy for joy. I saw a million sunrises in her eyes. We created nests and were granted a viable egg. That one hatchling was full of magic and mischief, and we set him loose on the humans as he grew, watching as they called him a trickster and a savior. He disappeared in their lives as something cherished and feared. We tried to call him back, but he had changed into a being that didn't want our life of flight. Saddened, we sought things to distract us and found that humans had become more interesting over the seasons. Curious as to what our child found so fascinating about them, we found a group on an island that had many wondrous things. Wheels that moved under the power of water, mirrors that sent sunlight to underground gardens, farms of fish, textiles and crafts that we longed to line our nests with. We swept in to interact. I swear I could hear the pounding music of something bad about to happen, and I wanted to clutch the arms of my chair and tell him not to go, but all I could do was listen. He was letting loose a song of joy and loss, and I managed to glance around. Everyone else was as enraptured as I, even the dragons and Bob. They were surprised that we spoke, but soon we were hailed as messengers from the gods, and our discarded feathers were prized for their beauty. The greatest gift we could bestow on someone was one of our molten pinions. He did pause to cast me a dirty look, which helped lessen the spell he wove just a touch. As people, they leaned into magic and used it in their life as naturally as Shira and I did. As their magic improved, their city became more marvelous and fantastic as they learned the laws of the world, and they interacted with nations all over the globe.
They sat in on the Council of Lords and were regarded as equal among the denizens.
He drank a bit of water, shuffling his feathers closer to him and flat. It was as if he dimmed the bulb in the room.
One of theirs was a Herald of Magic. Zenobia had succeeded Solomon when he left his physical existence.
I jerked at the name. It sounded familiar. Someone Tersane had mentioned as the last herald. Brix kept speaking.
She walked with magic and worked for her good, but Zenobia was arrogant and greedy. She wanted more than what she had. We had talked freely with her people, and they knew we would resurrect if we were killed, but not destroyed, though Shira and I thought nothing of sharing that knowledge. We had no reason to fear. Time passed, and we were ready to nest again, and we were granted a spot at the top of the government building. We built our nest with fabrics and yarns. It was full of comfort and warmth. To my delight, we had 3 eggs. We would have had children again.
Those last few words had so much joy and agony in them, I felt tears spring to my eyes. If this was a movie, I might have closed my eyes for the next part. His mental voice grew darker, and the joy faded from the room.
We trusted freely, too much so. I didn't realize we didn't realize Zenobia craved more than she had, though she had everything. She was regarded as gorgeous by her people, had a devoted spouse, children to be proud of, and was not only a herald of magic, but a high-ranked person in their government. The city knew no want. They had springs which provided fresh, clear water. The trees were so laden with fruit they had to support the branches. The fish jumped into their nets, and the animals were healthy and fecund. It was like living in paradise. I never saw the rot. The temple lay beneath our nest. We didn't mind people being able to see our eggs, though we were not easy to reach. We watched our eggs grow and felt the life in them. 3 more. Joy filled me, and I flew toward the sun to proclaim my joy. They would be hatching soon. There was no way life could be better. Then I froze, as I felt magic swell beneath me. A strange combination of order, spirit, and chaos in a way I've never seen.
All of Brix's feathers were held tight against the bird's small frame, as shivers racked it.
There came an explosion of sound, magic, and force. I knew no more. I woke 2 hours' flight away on a piece of debris, floating in the water that might have once been a door. I roused and flew back to Atlantis as fast as I could manage.
The name hit me like a physical blow, and I could hear the sharp inhales from behind me.
It took me centuries to piece together what happened. But here is what I know and believe at this point. It has been at least 3,000 of years since it occurred. I do not know the difference anymore.
The statement rang of truth, and I played back everything Brix had said. None of it had been a lie, or at least not a conscious one.
Zenobia linked all the realms through our nest. Each of our eggs, of my children, was attuned to a different realm. She sought to pull the power into her, to make her a god, essentially. To help with it, she linked also to the dormant volcano under their small continent. Then she used her power to pull it into her. It didn't work. Instead, the power of the volcano, her, and my children snapped the cord she had wrapped around magic, and the backlash was so great that it sundered the connection of the realms with Earth and cut off the flow of magic to the world.
Brix inhaled sharply, as if trying to calm nerves and focus on the story. I mimicked the action, knowing that if I had been Brix, my rage might have broken the earth.
My mind whirled with what I might have done, and part of me waited to hear the consequences.
With one selfish act, a being that had everything — power, wealth, family, love — sundered it all for the desire for more. And in doing so sacrificed not only the lives of every person on our continent, but my spouse and eggs. Their lives were ended before we had even named them. In my grief, I took my own life, going back to a chick, hoping it would remove the memories, the pain, the knowledge. It didn't.
The flat, hard words felt like a blow, and I wanted to close my eyes in sympathy. After the zoo, I understood his rage all too well.
It took me until Archimedes discovered the lever, and in turn provided a clue as to how I could open a door back to the realms. I left the world of men then, and vowed to never return. My spouse was dead, my children unmade. My only child vanished into the world of men.
He stopped and focused on me. The rage, sorrow, and desire to burn down the world, my world, clear in his eyes.
So yes, I blame Earth. I blame the human heralds who were so arrogant as to think what they had was not enough. But I place so much on you, Cori Munroe. You remind me of her, of the woman who stole everything. She was fair and dark like you. She had multiple lovers as you do. Everyone loved her. But she destroyed all that I held dear and sundered the world from magic. You don't know how many died that day. How many unicorns, griffins, dragons, creatures that no longer exist. Because when the realms were sundered, the food they needed or the magic that let them live was destroyed. There you have it. Everything I know about the undoing. It was caused by Zenobia of Atlantis. And she doomed her world and ours. And I'll gladly see all of you burn to ash before I assist.
There was a stunned silence through the room, and finally Esmere spoke.
You would see us destroyed as well as the denizens?
Until that moment, I hadn't known that birds could sneer, but the look he sent her way was a sneer.
Yes, all of chaos, all of order, all of spirit. None of you cared that yours had died. You all shrugged, treating it as if we had suffered an earthquake. The realms being blocked from Earth was an annoyance, not something that mattered. The only ones that cared were the ones whose spouses, families, lovers were on the other side of the undoing. Those found the lords and begged one-way doors to be opened. Most of the time they were granted. Those that I talked to wished they had never looked. In almost every case their loved ones was dead, skinned, often eaten. Grief took families who had never realized they were mortal too. As far as I'm concerned, all of you deserve every action the humans perform.
How can I stop the rips? I demanded. This was the one bit of information I needed.
I have no idea. But a herald caused it. Her notes, her research would also include hints as to how to repeat what she did. If you sunder the worlds fully, so there are no links left to Earth, we will be safe from the predations of humans.
I just stared at him, stunned, and my hands reached for Caroline. The idea of losing him, or even worse, him losing access to his mother, to my friends, was almost unthinkable. A cold, hard lump sat in my chest. Brix flapped his feathers.
I have done my duty. I am done. The council chair seat is vacant. I have achieved what I wanted, and may you all burn in the darkness of the void.
Before I could do anything,
There was a strange magical shift, and the feel of the room, the feel of Brix's presence changed. Then Brix flapped hard, wings flaring in colors. The ring around the bird's left foot glinted, and then dissolved. A moment later, Brix disappeared in a cloud of flames. Epilogue. The end times are upon us. Once again the world will sunder apart, and we shall fall into the grasp of nothingness. Say farewell to those you love, for soon it shall all be for naught. Doomsayer on a street corner. The council erupted into chaos as Brix vanished. At some point in this retelling, I'd returned to my chair, and now I just stared at the center, at the perch. I understood his anger, his rage, but it didn't solve or change anything, and it didn't help me figure out how to stop it. Had he been lying? Tursane. I said her name, but not a shout, just saying it. She paused and turned to look at me, others noticing and quieting down. Was he lying about the Herald needing to figure it out? I could tell when people were lying, but people didn't lie a lot, and everyone was very good at avoiding active lying, which meant, most of the time, I paid no attention to the little buzzes. Tursane tilted her head, obviously thinking.
No, or at least he believed everything he said, but that doesn't mean it was the truth.
I nodded, grimly aware of that fact from a few people I'd dealt with, and his comment that he doesn't know how to fix it, but that I am the one that can. The idea of cutting off access to the realms permanently made me nauseous.
I do not know, she admitted. I knew of the undoing, but not what he mentioned.
My eyes narrowed as a thought struck me. Zmog, you mentioned Atlantis should be a warning to us all. What did that mean? Again, I didn't need to speak loudly. The dragons could have heard me if I was whispering. Zmog turned her head to look at me, eyes a bit redder than usual. That a city based on magic vanished from the world and knowing. It was never linked to the undoing that I know of because we thought it happened after the undoing. The undoing was why they disappeared. But we all know how stories passed down over generations can change and twist things. I will say that the rips are starting to affect us, though. I know of at least one dragon that has stepped through the rips. She wasn't that impressed with what she saw. Too many people and buildings. I sighed and sat back. The denizens were all talking, chattering, and I could tune into conversations, but right now it didn't change anything. I turned in my chair to look at Sitlali, Scott, Shay, and Bainjarl. Thoughts? I need more coffee, Shay said, but his voice carried a level of exhaustion I recognized. But now we have something to look for. A flicker of memory. I think there was at least one book about Atlantis in the library, and I wouldn't be surprised to find others. But even if it had all the notes Zenobia left, is it going to be enough? Sitlali shrugged. We won't know until we try, and any information is more than we have. None of my people are that old. It is possible, from the time periods Brix spoke of, that Babylonians might have some info. My suspicion is we may need to read a lot to find any hints as to what is possible. At least, now we know we can read. Shay nodded. I've put out some feelers to see if there are any Merlins that might be interested in this type of research. Even just having knowledge of the language could help. A surge of warmth hit me. At least these people weren't just saying it was my problem. That had been what I got with Brix. That it was my problem, not ours. Ours was decidedly better. I'll need to let Stephen know the rips are going to escalate. I think he is setting up teams, but I don't know how much is getting spread to other countries.
We can help with that,
Kessis said. I turned to look at her. Oh? Her tail flipped at me in an obvious laugh.
After your comments, Caroline and I talked. We have always had the ability to find and talk to other focuses. Most of us just don't. Our mage provides what we need emotionally, or at least what we thought we did. It turns out having friends is good for you.
She hesitated on the word friends, and it made me want to hug her. Caroline stood up and took over the thread.
So, we have been spreading the word to other focuses, and from them to their mages. It won't happen overnight, but we are creating a network that allows information to be passed.
He licked my hand.
They will understand what is coming, and hopefully by the time you have found the solution, we will have a method to get the information out.
Shay stared at them.
You're creating a phone tree?
His voice was a bit incredulous. The three familiars just stared at him. I did too. Scott laughed.
They've never used one, Shay. They aren't that old.
I help,
Dolly put in, her tail wagging like she was trying to fly. Caroline cleaned his face.
Yes, even the canine is helping.
I chuckled softly. This means we have a path forward. Lots of research getting the word out. But there is one more thing. I stood and faced the council. I, Lord Cori Munroe, Herald of Magic, have a request I ask of the council and all those who live in the realms. My voice had an eerie weight to it. I really didn't understand the magic of this room. A hush swept over the room. The spectators had come down from the gallery, and it was full of beings mingling and talking. The previous floor show on the tip of everyone's tongue. They all turned to look at me, and I just stood there. I request that you talk to your friends, your relatives, and see if anyone knows of someone that was alive before the undoing. We need to talk to them. I want to make sure you understand the danger. If Earth decides they are at risk, the realms have the most to lose, and not even dragons will be able to withstand the weapons that will come to bear. My eyes swept the room, trying to convey the seriousness of this. Please, let me know if there is someone that will talk to me. A murmur that I interpreted as acceptance washed the room. I turned back to the humans. I don't know what else to do, but for now, I'm going to go home. I have children to hug, a dryad to remind she is family, and my partners to discuss all this with. I might still be a danger, and until the rips are stopped, I need to take precautions. Seatlali looked at me for a long time, to the point I began to shift uncomfortably. Cori, I believe if there were more people like you in the world, this planet would be a different place. She heaved a sigh and stood. Unfortunately, you seem to be unique. I will go home and search to see if anyone has any information about Atlantis, but this is doubtful. Most of our cultures didn't have written languages until 2,000 years ago. Well, after Brix is saying Atlantis was destroyed. There is one thing I want to point out, though. Our timelines and his may not be the same. I have zero idea when Archimedes discovered the lever, other than a long time ago. What if his time sense isn't accurate? If it was only 2,000 of our years, not 3, there might be much more information. Didn't Plato write about Atlantis? There are no seasons in the realms that I have seen, so their sense of the passage of time might not be correct. Or Brix may not realize how much time passed, just assumed. It was more than I'd heard her speak in one go, but I turned that over, looking out at the grass where Zmog lay. As always, the diffused light was present. Maybe, if nothing else, I'll make sure to extend my research farther up. I spoke slowly as I thought.
There were also some of the memento stones I'd never bothered with. Now might be the time.
Cori,
Scott said, looking at me. I shifted my attention to him.
You got this, but you aren't alone.
I smiled and looked at Caroline. Let's go home. I have kids to hug. Without a word, he created a rip to the house. I ached to hug Joe, Sable, Jazz, and Maine. Then I'd start on figuring out how to solve this. Appendix. Magic symbols. Chaos symbol contains entropy, fire, water, time. Order symbol contains pattern, air, earth, transform. Spirit symbol contains soul, relativity, non-organic, psychic. To view graphics of symbols, visit badashpublishing.com. Author's Notes. This is Book 7 in Twisted Luck, based in the Turnian universe. I am working Balanced Luck Book 8 and the last book in the Twisted Luck series. It is available for pre-order now, but it won't be the last book in the Turnian universe. I have at least one, if not more, standalone novels planned, including one for Scott Randolph and his start as a rogue mage hunter, plus a trilogy called Noble's Luck that is placed in the late 1800s. If you loved this novel, please take the time to leave a review. You will be amazed at the difference it makes. There is a lot more stories coming both in this universe and others. I'm writing as fast as I can. If you'd like to stay in touch, you can follow me on social media at the following places. Website, badashpublishing.com. Facebook, facebook.com/badashbooks. Twitter, twitter.com/badashbooks. Instagram, instagram.com/badashbooks. BookBub, bookbub.com, profile Mel Todd. If you're interested in free books, keeping up with what is going on in my life, as well as sales and launch announcements, you can sign up for my newsletter at my website. You never know what freebies might show up. Take care. Mel Todd. About the author. Mel Todd has over 44 titles out. Her urban science fiction Kaled Chronicles, the Blood War series, and the Twisted Luck series. Owner of Badash Publishing, she is working to create a place for excellent stories and great authors. With over 1 million words published, she is aiming for another 1 million in the next 2 years. Badash Publishing specializes in stories that will grab you and make you hunger for more. With one co-author and more books in the works, her stories can be found on Amazon and other retailers. You can follow her on Facebook at facebook.com/badashbooks. You can also sign up for her newsletter and follow her blog at badashpublishing.com. This has been a production of Unbalanced Luck, Book 7 of the Twisted Luck series. Written by Mel Todd. Narrated by Autumn Juliet. Copyright 2023, Melissa Todd. Production copyright 2023 by Autumnal Audio.